Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 135 of Through the Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor, show by show, from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame, joined always by the co-host, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, fall is cozy, isn't it?
Yeah, we got some unseasonably warm autumn weather here in New York in the northeastern U.S., and it's going to last for probably the next week or two. So but yes, it still looks pretty outside. So I'm enjoying the fall, although also feeling a bit of existential dread at world events. But
yes.
We're not here to talk about that, are we?
So I mentioned fall because where I live, there's this beautiful little like shrub slash tree, some kind of plant, man. I'm not a plant expert, one of these plantologists, but it's right outside my living room window, and the leaves are turned this like beautiful shade of deep red. But when like the sun casts on them, it turns like my entire living room into like very red lit, and it's become basically like the Kenny Rogers Roasters episode of Seinfeld, where I'm going insane because I'm living in like perpetual red during the day, unless I just want to go without light. Like everything is just red tinted. My food is red tinted. Because the kitchen is right next to the living room. It is. I am living in the most fall of worlds. It's a good pre for the future when I die and go to hell.
I appreciate though that you use the Seinfeld reference there instead of some of the lower hanging wrestling references like an early Kane match or a match involving the Fiend.
Well, Seinfeld always comes first, except in ECW, because as they let us know, that is not Seinfeld.
No, it ain't. It ain't Seinfeld. You couldn't be Seinfeld even if you wanted it to be. So, I'm trying to think now that you bring that up though. Like, what are they trying to say by suggesting that it ain't Seinfeld? Like, it's about something? Is that the idea? Like, there's substance to this? Are they saying that like they're not neurotic? Because I think that Paul Heyman was plenty neurotic. I don't know. What are they trying to say by saying it ain't Seinfeld? I need to know.
Like, I think Paul Heyman was just so desperate to shoehorn like contemporary pop culture references, because I've been, as you noticed recently, asked me on Twitter, like, why are you posting a lot of ECW 1994 content lately? I've just been kind of going through it in the background, just as something to have sometimes, and I've been watching a little bit as well, not just having it in the background, but like occasionally I'll just hear like, was that a Jeff Gillooly reference? like they're just shoehorning shit into it, or like it really was it's very much also like the Raws of that era occasionally, where like Vince decided like for a short time, like we got to be topical, so they would just like cram that. This is a lot like the Menendez. Oh, I'm sure they didn't reference the Menendez brothers, but
I don't know. Probably like in that edgy ECW, they might have.
Yeah, so
I mean, at WrestleMania 12, there was a whole big OJ sequence, right, with the Bronco,
yeah, the white Bronco,
Bronco chase. So yeah, they were referencing murderers. They wouldn't shy away from that. The most important thing to understand though is that it ain't Seinfeld. Not even close. It's not Seinfeld. It's not Grace Under Fire. It's not even Ellen.
A Grace Under Fire reference, like, Matt. We are soulmates. There's a reason we do this podcast.
Oh man, if you want me to just mention a bunch of 90s sitcoms that are less remembered than Seinfeld, I could do that. I can.
What was that name of that sitcom with the Lawrence brothers? That's the first one that popped in my head when I think of like B-grade sitcoms.
Lawrence, like Joey Lawrence,
Joey Lawrence and his brothers all starred together in a sitcom.
Oh God, I don't know that one. Jeez,
that was like huge for young kids. It was like the Avengers, all these Lawrences coming together. It was. Let me look it up.
Yeah, we gotta look that up. We can't leave our. I'm sure there's somebody listening that's screaming. If only RJ City was listening to this, he would know every Joey Lawrence reference that we could possibly find.
Brotherly Love with Joey, Matthew, and Andrew Lawrence aired on the WB from September 1995 to April 1996. Then it moved. Actually, that started on NBC. Then it moved to the WB when it got another season. So, see, this was a 2-season show, Matt.
Was this
40 episodes.
Was this on concurrently with Blossom?
No, I think this would be post Blossom. This would be Joey Lawrence's new thing.
Okay, man. Blossom was already done by 1995. Man,
I'm not sure.
It was not long enough for the world, I suppose.
I love that. We got so much to cover on this episode. Blossom, Brotherly. Okay, Blossom ran. No, Blossom.
And I see Blossom ended in 95, and then and then the Brotherly Love obviously started immediately after that. So he really had no time off. He went right from one to the other. But I've made Joey Lawrence references on this podcast before, just so you know.
We have heard of Matt Feuerstein, Whoa, before.
Yeah,
and we may hear one again.
We'd like talking about the tree of Whoa, right? We brought that up before. That's happened. I've done that. I've been there. Up and down that lonely whoa of faith. I have been there.
I am glad you bring the levity, because we have something I think we have to address that is not so pleasant, which is there has been a death in the Ring of Honor world between our last episode's recording and this one, and that would be a late CEO of Ring of Honor during the Sinclair broadcasting era, Joe Koff. Now, normally when someone from our era of Ring of Honor dies, it's pretty easy for us to handle it, because with someone like Jay Briscoe or Xavier, like, we've covered pretty much everything they've done in Ring of Honor, and I think we can very confidently speak to them and what their place in the company was, and what our personal feelings and all that stuff. Joe Koff oversaw an era in the Sinclair broadcasting that I'm sure we both watched some matches of it, but we were not giant fans of, and this podcast is never going to cover that era for a variety of reasons. But
name the main one being that we don't want to do this podcast till we're literally 70. But besides that, it's not the era that's not the one that inspired us to do the show. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. And so I was thinking, well, how much of a mention should I give? And then I started reading the coverage of Joe Koff this week, and I think the usual suspects had a lot of good coverage of it. Voices of Wrestling's podcast, they had a very nice chunk on him. Dave Meltzer made him the lead story in The Observer and devoted an additional good 10 to 15 minutes leading off one recent Wrestling Observer radio podcast. And one thing I started to realize how important this guy was to wrestling. And like a lot of people, we don't really examine it and kind of celebrate it until they pass. And the other thing that struck me is, as I kept reading people's remembrances of him, how many things he had common with Doug Gentry in terms of the likability and the ways he kind of helped Ring of Honor. And in fact, one of the many similarities he had to Doug Gentry was, I thought, just like with Gentry, Mike Johnson wrote the best piece about Joe Koff. Like, it was very similar vibes to the ones he wrote about Gentry, where you can tell he had real personal connection and affection for this person. And for, the criticisms I sometimes have of Mike Johnson, he can be a very good writer, and I think this was some of his best work I can remember. So I would highly recommend that in particular. So this is what I've decided. I'm going to just give a quick little mini history of Koff and why I think he's significant. And then we're going to move on, because I don't think either of us have any personal insights or knowledge of him or his era, or a deep-seated love of the era of the company he shepherded. But if nothing else, I think he deserves to be acknowledged. There's nothing I'm going to say right now that you can't hear in more detail on all those shows and articles I just recommended. So my idea is basically, this will give you a little idea of our audience, a little idea of him. And if you're interested in more, definitely check out those sources and more, but particularly that Mike Johnson article. So I guess to start off with, I would just quickly say, I feel like it's interesting to recap the ownership eras of Ring of Honor before we got to Joe Koff, because, as we've talked about extensively on the show, Ring of Honor was started by Rob Feinstein, owner of RF Video, the wrestling tape selling website, and his friends and co-workers, Doug Gentry and Gabe Sapolsky. And despite all the times, Matt, that we read reporters tell us in the first year of Ring of Honor how it was making money or breaking even, it was losing money almost immediately, pretty much. And to the point where basically a year in, Rob Feinstein was about to pull the plug on it. The last show was going to be Night of Champions in 2003, just a little over a year after the company started. And Doug Gentry reached out and he found someone that could chip in, and that was Kerry Silken, a ticket broker, big time wrestling fan, former ECW attendee, which is probably where all those guys would have met him. Gentry hooks them up. Silken becomes a silent investor at that point. Over the next months, the company continues to bleed money. Silken has to put more and more money in and negotiates more control, a bigger piece of the company in return. Then 2004 happens, Rob Feinstein scandal, and that over a course of months leads to Silken buying Rob Feinstein out completely, becoming more public, and being the 100% owner of Ring of Honor. And the next few years are like the days of wine and roses, back with the newsletter saying, oh, the company's doing good again, And it wasn't, when we look at the attendance and stuff, it was hotter and more popular than it had been before. And creatively, I think, it's our favorite era, but it was never making money. Kerry Silken will say that today. And so we're about to enter the era of Through the Years in just a few shows where we see the first of Kerry taking a couple big swings where he's like, we got to try something new to grow the audience of this company. And the first thing will be, let's go on pay-per-view, and maybe that will increase our total audience. That doesn't work. So at the start of near the end of 2008, he fires Gabe Sapolsky and replaces him with Adam Pearce. That doesn't really work. Start of 2009, he finally gets on television with a HD Net, which ends up becoming, nowadays people would know it better as Access TV. That doesn't really work. And then in late 2009, Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness announced that they are going to leave the company. And so Silken puts on a show, the end of this final countdown tour for Bryan Danielson. Funny how the more things change, the more they stay the same. But and the show, headlined by Danielson versus Nigel McGuinness one more time. And what people maybe don't know about that, I mean, Mike Johnson mentions it in his article, was Kerry Silken's plan was for that in late 2009 to be the final Ring of Honor show.
Did you know that until you read that article? Because I didn't.
I did know that Kerry was planning to shut it down without the Sinclair broadcast. I did not know it was that specific a show. I didn't
think it was then. I thought it was a little bit later than that. Yeah.
And so the story is, the way Mike Johnson tells it is, he wasn't going to tell he didn't tell anyone ahead of time this is going to be the last show, but the idea was, I'm going to let everyone have this great final night, the fans, and then sometime afterwards I'll announce that was it. And, thanks for everything. But right around that time, Jim Cornette is on the outs from TNA. He's looking for work. He gets back in contact with someone he's worked with before, Kerry Silken and Ring of Honor, and he finds out Kerry's plans. And he says, let me see if I can find you an investor, maybe don't shut down just yet. And he and a friend of his, Gary Juster, who is a promoter from the past, they have a connection. They find a man named Joe Koff, who worked for Sinclair Broadcasting. And Joe Koff was a wrestling fan. He helped produce the Battle of the Belts wrestling specials, not the crappy AEW modern ones, but there was a few Battle of the Belts specials in the 1980s for the NWA that were.
It was Florida, right?
I believe so, yeah. And it was what, clearly Tony was trying to evoke. It never really got off, but and so they got in contact with Joe Koff, and over a period of time, they were able to negotiate, and Joe Koff was able to get Sinclair to purchase Ring of Honor and save the company, much in the same way Doug Gentry was able to convince Kerry Silken and save the company in 2003. And in fact, Mike Johnson wrote in his article, I'll just quote him directly, quote, Joe was in so many ways the guardian angel of the promotion within the Sinclair broadcast group machine. And if we were going to be honest, that promotion was purchased as a gift for Joe out of respect for all he had done in Sinclair circles, as much as it was designed to be an asset that made Sinclair money, although it did do that as well. In fact, one of the reasons ROH was acquired was that financial data showed that owning and producing the company TV was actually a better investment than licensing more syndicated content. Think Seinfeld or Everybody Loves Raymond for these stations. So, Matt, they looked at this and realized this ain't Seinfeld. It's better.
Or they could have had a show called This Is Seinfeld, but better.
So, Sinclair basically buys it because, not just from the sounds of it, because of Joe Koff directly. To be a company so big and to have such stature in that kind where people can be like, we'll buy an entire wrestling promotion just because, you deserve it. It's a whim. It's an impulse purchase, the pack of gum at the till.
Why are you buying this? Well, Joe said it's good. That's basically
Joe
what it
likes
was.
wrestling.
Yeah, Joe said it's good. So that does show a lot of that does show a pretty high stature in that organization for sure.
And so Sinclair bought Ring of Honor. They kept it alive for years, and it had its most successful era ever under Koff. Like the peak of the Elite, the New Japan partnership, they ran MSG and filled it. They drew other record attendance for Ring of Honor. And a long time ago, someone, a pretty high prominent figure in Ring of Honor, reached out to me just based on some tweets I had made and DM me and said, like, there were eras of Sinclair where we made money for Sinclair. Now that's one source. Mike Johnson's another. I don't have any huge confirmation, but if so, I have to think that based on everything I've read and seen, that would be the only time in Ring of Honor history they ever made money. Which in itself, if you followed this podcast, you know what a monumental success that is
for any wrestling company.
Yeah. But then, AEW formed. The luster of the New Japan partnership faded a bit, especially because New Japan was starting to run their own shows more often. So, like, the idea of Ring of Honor was one of their selling points being this is where you have to go if you want to see New Japan in the U.S. That started to go away. COVID hit. Sinclair had their own financial issues with other properties they owned and needed to start cutting a lot of things. And Sinclair was looking to offload ROH. And at that point, you could argue that Koff saved ROH again because WWE made an offer to buy ROH, but they were going to do what WWE tends to do, which is buy a company, absorb the tape library, maybe pick up a couple of the contracts, and just shut it down. And Tony Khan, for what Ring of Honor right now is in a very reduced zombie form. Who knows if it'll stay that way? Who knows if it will exist in a few years? But if nothing else, it was more than WWE was going to do with it. So in that sense, Koff steered it towards Khan. Purchase it, saved it again in that sense. And the thing that struck me about Koff, reading all the coverage around him, is he seems to be overwhelmingly liked among people, from fans, from talent, and in particular in reporters. I haven't seen reporters being this glowing about their personal dealings with someone in quite a while. In fact, I'll quote Dave Meltzer on Twitter. He wrote that Koff was, quote, an absolute pleasure to deal with, honestly among my favorite main administrators ever. And I think Dave went further on a podcast to say, like, he was my favorite guy to work with ever running a wrestling company, which when you consider how Dave has probably talked to basically everyone running a major wrestling promotion for the last 40 plus years, that's a badge of honor. I mean, maybe the competition of the morals of wrestling promoters isn't always that high, but still. But I as I kept reading the reminiscences, people talking about him, he seemed to be very Doug Gentry-esque to me in that even though they both worked for ownership groups that were disliked for a lot of valid reasons by a lot of people, they personally seem to be able to behave in a way underneath them where they kind of stayed fairly as clean as you could. They seemed pretty well liked. And in fact, one other thing I want to mention is under Joe Koff's watch, ROH by all accounts had the best handling of any wrestling promotion during COVID. And I'll go again to Mike Johnson's article where he wrote, quote, ROH was the first major promotion to pause at the onset of the pandemic, shutting down a planned pay-per-view and TV taping in Las Vegas as the reality of what the world was about to endure became plain in Koff's mind. Instead, ROH shut down and everyone was paid. Even independent photographers who weren't under contract were paid for their missed dates. When ROH began taping TV again, they put the safety of what's on the books. ROH performers went through the strictest of protocols to be able to tape matches in empty venues for Sinclair. It was an extremely costly exercise, but Koff was always proud of the way he and Ring of Honor approached it, feeling it was the safest and most respectful way to handle it, as everything regarding COVID and how it should be handled evolved in real time. So I that's something that, not everyone will get, people want to forget COVID with good reason, but a lot of people did not handle COVID well in wrestling and from everything I've heard and seen, like, he did it the best at great cost to the company. And then finally, the last thing I would say is there's All In. Like, when the original All In pre-AEW happened, remember that was Joe Koff's Ring of Honor, and everyone in Ring of Honor, basically the full-timers, had contracts that granted ROH exclusivity to dates in America and Ontario. And I think they gave an exemption for PWG because so many of the guys love PWG. But Joe Koff didn't have to let them do All In. In fact, ROH ended up helping produce the pay-per-view, and they owned it until Tony Khan bought ROH. And that show ended up being, the test balloons, in some ways the proof of concept for AEW. And I won't be the first person to say this, but I think there's a very good chance that without Joe Koff, there's no AEW, because without Koff, there's no ROH past 2009. Without that, the Elite still likely would have been successful in New Japan on the Indies, but they wouldn't have had that platform to draw thousands in America with a major TV promotion. And I think without that, does Tony Khan and TV executives, are they as confident in the idea of, hey, you could build a whole TV promotion on a major cable network around this? I honestly doubt that. I don't know for sure, but yeah. And so with all that said, just seemed like a nice guy. A lot of people had good things to say. And one of those rarest commodities in pro wrestling, which is a TV executive that actually liked pro wrestling, and you see how much of an impact just one likes it, how much of an impact you can make on wrestling. You can literally change the business for generations. And yeah, rest in peace, Joe Koff. Condolences to his family and friends. And if you want to learn more, again, Voices of Wrestling podcast, the Observer podcast and newsletter, the Mike Johnson piece, all recommended. And that brings us to the show today that we will be covering. The fifth year festival, Philadelphia, took place February 17th, 2007 at the Philadelphia National Guard Armory in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in front of a reported crowd of 900 fans. So I think the last show in Philly was the Bitter End, which did 650. So they're not quite at the CZW ROH feud levels where it was like 1,000, 1,100 fans in Philly when they were kind of drawing fans from both audiences, but still a nice bump for the Joe Farewell Tour. Brian Alvarez wrote in Figure 4 Weekly, the Saturday show in Philly before 1,100 fans, which I saw no one come close to that, was said to be one of the company's all-time great shows. I don't want to tip my hand too much. I will say, irregardless of what I feel about the show overall, I don't think it was the best show Ring of Honor put on that weekend.
I don't recall anyone suggesting such a thing.
Well, Brian Alvarez not in touch with Ring of Honor, and I promised last show we will get to him. The big thing is late in the show. Trust, I said it before. Everyone gets to turn on through the years. We are coming for Brian Alvarez later in the show.
Oh my God, I didn't even know about this. Making me nervous.
It's nothing. It's silly, stupid, goofy stuff. But and Mike Johnson wrote at the time in PW Insider that Xavier was slated to appear at ROH's return to Philadelphia on this night. That never happened, so I wonder if that was originally always in the plan for Philly, and then maybe it just shifted around. They decided, well, if he worked New York, then maybe he doesn't need to work Philly, or if something came up. But again, I saw on the last show, would have liked to see a little more Xavier, but it turned out the previous night show, that was it for him in Ring of Honor. We open picking up from where the last episode left off, as every fifth year festival show until the end is going to end with a to-be continued cliffhanger, some better than others. In this case, it is who just knocked out Jack Evans out backstage, pinned him under a plank of wood, and we find out that right beside him now is a smiling Davey Richards, who smugly tells us that he's not claiming responsibility for anything, but accidents happen when you go against the No Remorse Corps. So,
hold on a second though. I have a bone to pick with this. Jack Evans pretty clearly did not go against the No Remorse Corps. That was sort of the whole point, right? Aries wanted him to, and he was like, I'm not gonna take sides on this. He did not go against the No Remorse Corps. Am I wrong?
Matt, it's only gonna get Matt. You know what? I didn't even think of that. You are absolutely right. But I was focused more on something that really annoyed me about this angle later in the show. But
sure.
There's a lot to pick. There's a lot of toppings at the salad bar, Matt. But we then get our usual fifth year festival highlight package from ROH's first 5 years. That's going to intro all of these shows. And next, we get BJ Whitmer backstage doing yet another one of these stupid early 2007 RH promos where the wrestler is not looking into the camera, but instead off to the side. And Matt, here's another thing. Okay, watching 1994 ECW, Paul Heyman does it a couple times. That's where he got it from. It's
not from that weird end of WCW thing. It's from 1994 ECW.
Yeah, and the angle, the way ECW, it's hard to explain. It's subtle. I feel like they do it better. But knowing that Gabe, was a longtime ECW employee and understudy of Paul Heyman, it was like when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, he got it from goddamn ECW, of course. I don't know why he decided to bring it back now. I don't know how long it's going to last. Hopefully not much longer, but here it is. So BJ says Lacey tried to pay Brent Albright to take him out, but that was money wasted because it didn't work. Now he's one step closer to Jimmy Jacobs and putting this all to an end. He says this has gone on for over a year now, and over that time they've done unimaginable things to each other. They've damn near killed each other. BJ's starting to think that the only way this can come to an end is for one of them to cripple the other. He's willing to make the sacrifice to cripple Jacobs and take him out of this sport, and he asks if Jimmy's willing to do the same to him. The camera then moves to in front of BJ, but kind of below him, so BJ has to start looking down a little bit at the camera. Again, what the hell is going on with camera angles in early 2007 Ring of Honor? I don't know. And he tells the fans to not think for a second after this is over that he's lost sight of that grand prize here in Ring of Honor. He wants that ROH World Title. So
I have another bone to pick with this promo, which is he's acting like, oh yeah, I'm going to take care of Jimmy Jacobs, and then finally I'll be able to focus and get a shot at the world title. He gets a shot at the world title on the next show.
Yeah.
In 6 days. So like it does nothing to do with the Jimmy Jacobs feud at all. He didn't wait till it was over. He didn't need to get settled first. He gets a title shot like immediately.
Yeah, like it's weird. Like that promo makes it sound like, I'm going to finish this Jacobs feud, and then my next story arc I'm already previewing will be me going after the world title. Instead, yeah, like he gets the world title shot before the Jacobs feud ends. Like, yeah. So yeah.
Again, 6 days after this.
Yeah. We then join interviewer Rebecca Bayless somewhere else backstage, who was here with Jimmy Rave. She brings up that he lost to Homicide last night and used the Styles Clash in that match, which he is banned from using. Rebecca says she's talked to Ring of Honor officials and has been informed that he's suspended tonight as a result of that. Jimmy says no one is suspending him. He'll be on the show tonight. Samoa Joe walks into frame and he asks Jimmy, what is he doing? He says, Jimmy, you're taking advantage of people that are weaker than you, or in this case, those who have their back turned. Just as the last time the two of them had physical contact, Jimmy put Joe in a heel hook. Jimmy says the only reason he did that was because at Final Battle, Joe slapped him. Joe says he's lucky he doesn't slap him again right now tonight. Joe says, in fact, because it's my farewell tour and I get to make requests, it's your lucky night, Jimmy. He says, because I like you and I respect your shirt, at which point I think you can see Jimmy trying to stifle a laugh. He's going to talk to Ring of Honor officials and make a little demand. Jimmy's suspension is going to be lifted tonight because he'll be wrestling Joe. Joe says whatever animosity the two of them have, they'll settle tonight. Joe ends by saying, by the way, Sears called bitch, and then he tugs Jimmy's shirt and he goes, you're late on your credit. And as Joe walks away, Jimmy just offhandedly says to Rebecca Bayless, it doesn't matter. Like, it was such a defeated, like, it doesn't matter. Like, just.
It doesn't matter that he's late on his credit? Was he admitting to that?
It was like the Trevor Dame end of a promo, like just saying, everything I said doesn't, nothing matters.
But yeah, I you must appreciate that they at least tried to explain the whole him using the Styles Clash thing.
Yes, because I got on the show on the last episode saying, why have him do the Styles Clash and not have him get DQ'd when he was banned from using it. But yeah, I will admit they do here, is it completely fulfilling? I don't know, but it gets at least 70% of the way there. The idea of Joe basically being like, I'm going to ask them to, change this up. And, again, on this night, it was originally supposed to be Davey Richards versus Joe, but because Richards was injured for this weekend, they swapped this because this was supposed to happen on the next show, Rave versus Joe. So Philly gets this match and Dayton gets the other. And then we get 3 dark matches that did not make the DVD. We had a dark tag team match. Pele Primo and Rhett Titus defeated Alex Payne and Bobby Dempsey. Then we had a dark Ring of Honor top of the class trophy title match. Shane Hager defeated Alex Payne. So Alex Payne's in the losing situation of the tag match, gets a title shot, loses that. And then in our dark card main event, Sarah Del Rey defeated Mitch Franklin. So I would assume that was the start of Sarah Del Rey squashing men. And that brings us to the opener of the show proper. Nigel McGuinness defeats TJ Perkins via pinfall in 5 minutes, 59 seconds after hitting the rebound lariat. This match we're informed, was taped for ROHvideos.com. And like most matches taped for ROHvideos.com, it's a 5 to 6 minute squash for an established star. On commentary, Lenny Leonard acts like this is Perkins' Ring of Honor debut. But in fact, he had actually had 5 matches in the promotion before this. 1 in 2003, 4 in 2005. But they were all as the masked gimmick Puma. So I guess if you want to keep Puma kayfabe, this is TJ Perkins' first official Ring of Honor match. But if you really want to be real, this is actually his 6th. But Matt, what'd you think about this?
Well, Nigel was really over. People really were into him at this point. Like the crowd loved him. But it was still a weird match though, because it's like it was high energy. It was well worked. Like I said, the crowd reactions were great. But in some ways, it was kind of like the worst of all worlds booking wise, because it was a squash. But also Perkins kicked out of the Tower of London for no reason, because they don't, as far as I remember, they don't really book him after this. So I don't know why they had him kick out of one of Nigel's finishers in a squash. It wasn't long enough to be memorable, but also didn't really put anyone over. So I don't really understand what they were like. If this match had been like, if they had treated this like the John Walters Nigel match from Boston a few months earlier, where it was actually like an 18-minute competitive match, or if this was just a total squash, I feel like it would have been more effective. As it is, it was like entertaining, but it felt minorly counterproductive. It certainly wasn't productive. So I'm not really sure what to think of it. I did not have a bad time watching it, but I thought it was maybe sort of ill-conceived.
I liked it maybe slightly more than you, but I had a lot of the same feelings of, I felt like Nigel gave Perkins a surprising amount of offense here. And, I enjoyed it for what it was. Like TJ is super sprightly here. He's doing a lot of high flying flips, running around. He's a lot of what I can best describe as boingy young puppy dog energy, Matt. That's the only way I can describe. He seemed to have a lot of pep in his step. I thought it bordered on giving Perkins too much. And like you, I was like kind of shocked that they had him kick out of the Tower of London, and the announcers really put it over big. And like you, I thought, you're really putting this over big for a guy who's not going to be back. Like,
yeah,
is
he back at all? I don't remember.
He only comes back in this era for the late year when they do the Cow Palace in Vegas. Because I assume, like looking at the cage match, I looked up after this just to confirm. Yeah, TJ Perkins was like a California guy. So I assumed the reason why he was never brought back was they didn't want to fly him out. And maybe he was just in the area, or who knows why he worked this show. But yeah, they clearly like him enough that when they were back in the area, they book him again, but they're not going to fly him out. So yeah, it was weird though to see him get this much, knowing they are not going to bring him back. And Nigel does get to show off. This is just basically in the parts of the match he's controlling. It's what you'd expect from on ROHvideos.com introductory match, which is it's just him showing off like what he can do, his lariat variations, getting the quick win, doing the Tower of London, but Perkins surviving it. It was perfectly fine squash, but like you said, maybe a little bit confused, counterproductive, where you gave a little more than Perkins for a guy that you're not going to have back. We then return backstage to find Lacey, Jimmy Jacobs, and Adam Pearce. Lacey is wearing a shirt that says "A Star Is Born," so she's clearly retroactively mourning the passing of Chris Christopherson. So tonight, she says tonight the three of them are in a mixed tag street fight. She puts an arm on Pearce's shoulder. She tells him she chose him to be their partner because he's proven how tough he is and how violent he can get in that CZW feud. Shane Hagedorn walks into frame and he pushes Lacey's hand off of Pearce's shoulder, saying that Pearce is his man and he knows Pearce can get the job done. Lacey tells Jimmy that he could learn a thing or two from Pearce and asks him to pay attention to Pearce in their match tonight, and also to pay attention to her because she's going to take care of Daisy Hayes once and for all tonight, and Jimmy can learn from that too. Lacey at this point then tells Pearce if he can take out Whitmer and Cabana tonight, there will be an awful lot of money in it for him. Pearce says he and Whitmer may have been on the same side, and he and Cabana may be from the same place, but Lacey's offered something none of those idiots have, and that's money. Jimmy Jacobs then angrily shouts at this point at Pearce, telling, don't forget why we're here. We're going to go to war with the crest of love on our shields. Lacey rolls her eyes at that and literally tells Jimmy, like, shut up, and tells Pearce not to worry about Jacobs, apologizing to him. I hope you guys enjoy it, because that will be the last time that Lacey is mean to Jimmy Jacobs.
Yeah, so we've been begging for some sort of change in this angle, and finally, it seems like we're getting it.
Yeah, and I like it's just sometimes when people talk about like making booking make sense, and people say it's not hard, like it really is in the sense of why is Pearce teaming up with these guys? You have Lacey and like say a couple lines in and Pearce say one line about it being money. He's a hired guy. A very simple thing just to give you a reason. you don't have to go crazy with this kind of stuff to kind of tie things together. That brings us to the second match on the show. Austin Aries defeats Claudio Castagnoli via pinfall in 9 minutes flat after he hits the 450 splash. And speaking of trying to come up with stories for matches that, I think a lot of promotions would ignore, the story for this match is we're told that the Aries requested it personally because the last time ROH was in Philly at the bitter end, he lost a match where he got disqualified for using Claudio's briefcase. So even though the Aries and Strong versus Hero and Claudio feud has been over for a while now, like long enough that both teams are now broken up, Aries wants revenge. And again, it's another nice example of something we talk about, how Gabe didn't just book show to show, but he booked show in that city to the next show in that city, so it's kind of following up. The last Philly angle gets resolved on the next Philly show. Aries comes into this match with the injured ankle. He got hurt the night before. I don't think it was an angle where he nearly died doing that K Brada on the show the night before that we covered on our last episode. Here he's limping at times and favoring it, and it's often hard to tell how much in wrestling is real and how much is selling, but I would say it's probably likely it's restricted this match in some way. It's weird because on one hand, 9 minutes is shortish, but it's not an insubstantial amount of time for a match. And Aries does a lot of his big moves here, that including moves that require him to really push off on his feet, I would imagine, like the heat-seeking missile tope, the 450. He does not do the K Brada he nearly kills himself on the night before. But yeah, it just doesn't feel this match feels like it's a guy trying to get through it. Like, there's not a lot of emotion to this match. There's bursts of movement and it spills to the floor, but it just feels like a match where you're doing it because you have to. You're just like, okay, we're booked through this. Let's do enough. Maybe all of this is in my head just because I knew going in that Aries was hurt, or maybe because, quite frankly, I felt like this match was very average and there's not much to say about it. I liked Claudio doing a flying European uppercut springboarding off the second rope. I liked Aries countering Claudio's big swinging sit-out X-Factor type thing he does by laying on his feet and then doing the drop kick to the head of a sitting opponent that he loves to do so much. I thought that was a nice, fresh way to get into a move that sometimes can be stale because he's done the same head scissors variation of it so often. But other than that, I don't think I remember anything else in this match, or probably did even the next day after I rewatched it. Favorite part of the match, Matt, was on his way to the ring. During his ring entrance, Claudio is arguing with a lot of fans in the crowd. In fact, he might have spent as much time doing that as he did wrestling this match. And one fan just says to him, "You used to be nice to everybody. What happened?" And that was such a gentle heckle. You used to be nice. What happened? And that's my kind of heckle. It's the gentle heckle. But what'd you think about this?
Well, I think I maybe liked it very slightly more than you. I thought it was a solid match. A couple of things that I noticed though is Claudio, especially at the beginning, was really laying on the heel thing kind of in a heavy-handed way with, the crowd went hey at him, and instead of just looking angry, he kept yelling, "This is my thing. I'm allowed to say that. You're not allowed to say that. I'm allowed to say that." And he kept doing that. "No, don't say it. I'm allowed to, not you." And it was wow, I felt like you were a little more subtle before. The thing that I've been annoyed at with the heel Claudio stuff during his singles run was he just didn't really show a lot of what he could do. And then in some of those very late Kings of Wrestling matches, he started showing the amazing athleticism he has again. Here it was sort of a mix. He was, more himself than in some of the matches earlier in 2006, but still holding back a little bit. And I realized between those two things, the heavy-handed healing and holding back a little bit, I'm really ready for Claudio to finally just become a babyface. I don't know. I don't remember when that officially happens, but he feels a little more unleashed when he gets to do that. Aries, what I thought was interesting was, he makes up for it later on, after the match and in the angle and stuff, but he seemed pretty nonchalant in this match for somebody who had just been turned on by his best friend and tag team partner of the past few years. He just was "Oh yeah, I'm here. I'm just going to do a match." Like I said, after the match, there is an angle and he does get to show that he's really pissed off. So I appreciate that, but it's interesting that they had him do this just totally normal match before we got to see angry, vengeful Aries. I thought that was kind of an interesting choice.
Yeah, and in fact, that brings us to what happened after the match. Afterwards, Aries grabs the mic and he talks about how last night Roderick Strong turned on him, formed a new team with Davey Richards, whereas Aries says he likes to call him Austin Aries Light. Oh, snap. And Aries says, unlike him, he's going to do this like a man and go to his face. So he calls him out right now. But instead of Roderick coming out, Jack Evans comes to the ring. Jack says he's usually the jokester, but he's being dead serious here. He can't let a war start between Austin and Roddy. Jack says they have so much history. There's nothing here that can't be settled over a couple Jaeger bombs, some Wii bowling, some Gears of War. And boy, I was like, man, this puts me back into 2007, like Wii bowling. Holy shit. Jack tells Austin that they can make Roderick come to his senses. He just needs time. Roddy, with his giant black eye, and Davey Richards walk out from behind the curtain. So they stay at the ramp. Roddy says he'd like nothing more than to walk down this aisle and get in the ring with Aries right now. But he has a huge FIP heavyweight title match tonight. Roddy says in the future, Aries will see why he was the top member of Generation X when he pins him 1, 2, 3 in the middle of the ring. Roddy then turns his attention to Jack, calls him the Peacemaker, and he says Jack is either with Roddy or against him. And the more he sees him around Austin, the more it tells him that Jack is against him. Roddy says this isn't a friendship thing. This is about taking the top spot in Ring of Honor, at which point you can hear Aries say in the ring off mic, oh, I wonder where he got that from, which of course is a reference to that was basically the verbiage he used when he turned on Alex Shelley and kicked him out of Generation Next years earlier and took over the stable. Davey then grabs the mic and he says he couldn't have said it better himself. Davey calls the fans in Philly idiots, in case you were wondering if the stable's supposed to be heels or not. And he says they're currently recruiting people for the No Remorse Corps. And he tells Jack it's time for him to decide if he's with them or against them. He and Roddy leave, and Aries talks on the mic, correctly pointing out that Davey just pronounced the name of his own stable. It's the No Remorse Corps, not the No Remorse Corpse. And then he goes, because Corpse is what Davey's going to be when I get done with you.
Pretty good ad-lib.
Yeah. Aries then tells Jack whether or not he wanted this to escalate into a war, it's too bad because it already is. And whether Jack has his back or not, Aries has Jack's back, and Jack has some decisions to make. Jack gets on the mic again, and he sadly says, Austin, man, come on, that's my boy. Don't make me do this. And I'll say this for Jack. I mocked his acting at being unconscious on the last show. His line read here I thought was really good and really sympathetic. It was so sympathetic on that last line. You could hear a few people in the crowd go, aww. And Aries then says, I'm not going to make you do anything, Jack. You can do what you want, but from here on out, I have a new focus in Ring of Honor, and that's beating the ass of the No Remorse Corps, the No Remorse Corpse, the new Corpse Order, he says. I don't care what they call themselves. I'm coming for them. Aries then walks backstage as Jack falls behind, trying to talk him out of this idea. And yeah, again, I thought this was pretty well done, other than Davey Richards not knowing how to pronounce the name of his own stable. I thought Jack Evans, the night before you talked, Matt, and I agreed, like how they try to do a million story beats like in one segment, and they do a bit of that here. But I think one thing was Jack Evans. It was like, why are you trying to talk Aries out of this? Like, I get that they're both your friends, but shouldn't Aries be kind of mad at this? Like, I feel like his performance here kind of really sold the idea of like, the idea of it felt when he was talking about like the Wii bowling and stuff, it felt relatable. Like he really is thinking he can just, you can imagine the Jack Evans character really does think he can bring these guys back together. And
which is why they should have, which is why though they should have just done this and not the whole thing the night before after the turn. They should have just done the turn the night before and introduced Jack here. That's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll have another segment of this later, but that's that one for now. And that brings us to a 6-man tag team Philadelphia street fight. BJ Whitmer, Colt Cabana, and Daisy Hayes defeated Adam Pearce, Jimmy Jacobs, and Lacey in 13 minutes, 31 seconds when BJ Whitmer pinned Jacobs after hitting an exploder suplex off the top turnbuckle. Before I throw it to you, Matt, I will give you just a taste of what's to come with Brian Alvarez, because this was from Figure 4 Weekly, Brian Alvarez writing at the time, and for some reason, he hated BJ Whitmer at this time. This is a quote he wrote. BJ Whitmer and Colt Cabana and Daisy Hayes beat Lacey and Jimmy Jacobs and Adam Pearce in a street fight. Jacobs had Lacey tape Colt up and then hit him in the neck with a high-heeled shoe. This, of course, was not the finish because BJ Whitmer had to pin someone. I was like, does BJ Whitmer have a reputation for like being overly pushed?
Maybe Brian was ahead of his time on this,
Well, we'll get to more later because this is just the tip of the iceberg. But What'd you think about this, Matt? Yet another Whitmer and Company versus Jacobs and Company brawl.
If this was the first match in the feud, it was like this, I would say this was great. You know, it was like good heat, nonstop action. It progressed multiple future matches. The main problem was like the whole thing is dragged on for so long that we've like seen different versions of this over and over again. Now, you know, we have Pierce's involvement, and that, you know, added a little something, I suppose, but he felt kind of like an also-ran. So, you know, it's what you'd expect. They start in the aisleway, brawling. Pierce has the first instance of man-on-woman violence by poking Hayes in the eyes. So I guess that's a new one. And then we get different like split screens. A lot of times they're all brawling in the crowd. Hayes is wearing a BJ Whitmer t-shirt that's styled like the Budweiser logo. I don't remember that shirt, but it says "This bumps for you." Do you remember that shirt?
I remember that shirt. I remember being like, I guess you can get away with that because of parody, but
yeah. Or just it flew under the radar, which is how they got away with a lot of stuff, you know.
That's also one of those shirts where, like, it's one of those wrestling shirts where if you are not a wrestling fan, you see that shirt that has a very different connotation. Like, this bumps for you. Like,
like,
this kind of
like
shirt,
cocaine,
like endorsing
cocaine, you mean,
cocaine.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say if you know wrestling, that probably is also what the shirt meant.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah. But you know, they have some fun stuff like Colt Cabana throwing Daisy Hayes as she does the flying asshole into Lacey in the corner. I enjoyed that. There's a spot where Jacobs was like perched atop the guardrail and Whitmer hits him, and Jacobs takes a full back bump all the way from the top of the guardrail to the concrete on the floor, and that looked like it didn't feel good. There's a point where Jacob starts attacking Whitmer with like a wheelie case that, you know, they use, I guess, you know, for like, you know, transporting equipment around in the crowd. There's a point where Whitmer hangs Jacobs over the top rope with his belt. And then Jacobs breaks free by spiking Whitmer. So, you know, Whitmer blades, as you do. So you get all the spike stuff going on. Jacobs doing repeated spikings. Cabana tries to save him, but Pierce pulls him out of the ring, and Whitmer definitely does a good blade job here. He's pretty good at blading. His face is a bloody, bloody mess, which it should be if you get spiked, I would say. And so at one point, Whitmer blocks the Contra Code by putting Jacobs on the top rope, and then Jacobs bites Whitmer's head, but Whitmer still puts him on his shoulders, and Jacobs hits a reverse Hurricane Rana and covers, but Cabana saves him, drops him over his knee in like an air raid crash position, and then Pierce does a choke slam, which is becoming a bigger part of his repertoire. And I have to say, Adam Pierce does a surprisingly good choke slam. Not as good as the one he did against Pele Primo, where he basically turned him like completely inside out. But even against Cabana, very good choke slam. Then we get to the point where eventually Jacobs does the thing where he tapes Cabana's hands behind his back, and Lacey gives him the high heel, and he hits Cabana in the throat with it, and Cabana does the Ricky Steamboat cough cell, and then he tries to Pillmanize Cabana's head, but Whitmer saves him from that. And then Whitmer and Jacobs fight on the top rope. Whitmer exploders Jacob off the top rope for the win, which gets a huge pop, so I guess even though Alvarez doesn't like it, people very much enjoy Whitmer hitting that exploder and pinning Jimmy Jacobs. But yeah, no, I thought I think the work in the match was good. I've just seen so much of this at this point. It just feels like a rehash at this point. Like, it's just like, all right, let's get on with it already. But I would say of all these like multi-person brawls between this cast of characters, this was a good one, and the crowd was into it. I didn't like it as much as maybe I would have if it had taken place like 5 months earlier.
I like this match a bit less than you, but maybe for a lot of the same reasons you felt the way you did about the match. Maybe I just felt them a little more strongly. It just feels like something, like you said, you know, we've had this a bunch of times. This feels like a pattern we've kind of caught with rewatching all of Ring of Honor in the Gabe era, where a lot of great feuds or ideas, it feels like he repeats a certain phase of the story just one or two shows too long often, trying to drag it out, like, or even sometimes a more extreme example, like people like the ROH riot, and then he repeats it 2 more times, the exact same thing. Or we were talking about like the end of the Summer Punk angle, which is a great angle. It felt like just the last 1 or 2 shows, it was getting like, okay, it's time to maybe get to the end of this. Same with the CZW feud, another great angle. But by the end, it was like, okay, we've seen a little bit of the same kind of thing. And,
what is that it's stalling until you get to the show where you want to do the blow off. So you just have to figure out how to stall the feud, and that's kind of what this is.
And I will say, to Gabe's credit, usually that period, I feel like where you're revisiting you're going the same beat to stall a little too much. It usually isn't very long that he does that, but it does seem to happen. It's happened a bunch of times now in Ring of Honor's history. And that's what I felt like here. I really like the early – we've seen a million of these tag brawls in this feud. I like the early ones because I felt like they were action-packed with a lot of big ideas when it came to spots. This one was a little more meandering to me. I felt like there was interesting spots. You laid them out, but I felt there was fewer of them. It's tornado rule, so there's a chunk of this match spent with your usual generic crawl brawl. But for a lot of this match, they work it like a lot of brawls that have a ton of people involved in them, where you kind of have almost everyone in the match outside the ring doing very generic brawling that you don't care about. And then everyone kind of takes turns, right? 2 guys go in the ring and do like the interesting spot you have planned. And then you guys go about, you do brawl on the outside, 2 other people go in. It's just one of those weird things where wrestling, you really become aware of how much of a performance it is, where everyone's basically taking turns doing their bit, like you're at a stand up, behind the scenes. I did really like the Daisy Hayes thing you mentioned where Colt throws her to do the flying butt in the corner. Or as Dave Prazak said on commentary, instead of saying it flying butt, he says, and I quote, "Flying Daisy Hayes ass connects in the corner." And I love that he went that specific. And you mentioned the other stuff, the blade job, the spike, the being chucked with the belt. Overall, I would say it's not unentertaining. There's a fair bit of fluff, though, between the spots that are memorable. At this point in the feud, a match work like this really felt, like you said, like padding the feud out. I guess you're supposed to feel like the feud's been taken to a new level because Colt takes the high heel in the throat. And, it does end up being, it has a big ramifications we'll see later for the Lacey Jimmy Jacobs dynamic. But for Colt, it's almost hard to take that as a serious angle when, like, we saw him in the Homicide feud, like, getting literally like nearly murdered with Drano. Like at that point, it's almost like anything else feels like a step back. Like he'll be okay. he took a high heel to the throat. He'll be okay, even though they're trying to sell it later as really big. So overall, I'd say this was a little bit above average. I've liked other matches they've done better. The most notable thing to me was Jacobs being the only guy in this match full of people dressed for street fight who decide to wear a button-up shirt and dress pants. And later when the shirt comes off, we see he's wearing hoop nipple rings. And I know he's worn nipple rings before in matches. I probably mentioned it before. But every time I see those, like people talk about things that they get squeamish on in wrestling. Like this is weird, but like I get more squeamish watching Jimmy Jacobs wrestle in hoop nipple rings than I get for like Swerve and Hangman Page stapling stuff to each other, because there's just something
what about syringes?
Maybe even that, because that's a very like I've gotten needles before, and have they ever gone completely through a piece of flesh all the way to the other side? No, but like it's a thin needle. Like the idea of just knowing that like one errant like chop or grab a guy and your finger gets caught and then you pull back without realizing, like there's just I would much rather get stabbed than torn, Matt. I think is what I'm trying to say here.
It's been a long time since we've seen a match where somebody pulled out somebody's belly button ring as like a spot, but that was a thing for a while.
Yeah, the Jeff Hardy earring spots where like you got the really extended lobe thing and you play around with it.
The gauges.
Yeah, exactly.
There was that spot where Randy Orton put a screwdriver in Jeff Hardy's ear and like twisted it. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and that almost just made me feel like watching like a old Carnival Barker like show. Like hey, the amazing rubber ear. But for some reason, it's the nipple rings, Matt, that does it to me. I don't know why. No one clipped that for a soundboard of me saying it's the nipple rings that does it to me. But. So also, other good part of this match was, did you notice that after the match, Colt does this unintentionally funny little run to the back with his arms still duct taped by his sides? Like instead of being healthy, he just kind of has to like run to the back with his arms still taped up.
Although it being Colt, it's always a question of if it was actually unintentionally funny.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to, I think, the most, well, maybe not the most, it depends what you consider notable. The big time match for me on the show, and that would be the Briscoes of Jay and Mark defeat El Generico and Kevin Steen in 18 minutes and 2 seconds when Mark pinned Kevin Steen. And after he and Jay hit him with a simultaneous shooting star press and top rope leg drop. So, Matt, one thing I used to really like doing on through the years was going through shoot interviews, because I feel like, I comb through the newsletters and websites as best I can and compile things and try and, present a picture. I think that's fun for me, and I think it adds to the show, hopefully. But I really always like the shoot interviews because I feel like it's easier for people to find the written word for themselves and read it quickly for themselves. Shoot interviews, it's so many hours, it takes more work. And we used to do that a bit in the early episodes because there were a few shoot interviews like the Samoa Joe CM Punk one and early Punk ones and stuff like that, where guys from Ring of Honor in this era did shoot interviews. And then that really, the amount of people talking about this era in shoots dried up. And now with Kevin Steen in Ring of Honor, there is, for people that didn't live in this era, because we do have some early 20s listeners, as depressing as that is, as I love that it is, it just reminds me of my mortality. No one in this era did more shoot interviews than Kevin Steen. If you had a chair and a few dollars, Kevin Steen, amiable guy that he is, would sit down and talk about his career with you. And he did one for Smart Mark Video that was like 4.5 hours or more. He did one with High Spots that was 2.5 hours. He did one with RF Video, which was 4 hours. He had an entire series of shoot interviews he did with High Spots called The Kevin Steen Show, where he would have guests on, including one episode with Gabe Sapolsky he had on, which I rewatched a bunch of it for this show. There are some charming parts of that. Boy, there are some parts that make me a little bit uncomfortable, like the way they kind of talk around, like nothing bad, but Steen will say things, you can tell there are things that have kind of bugged Game in the past, and he'll say that they bugged him, and then they'll kind of talk through it, and it'll be fine. But it's just it's just a thing. It's worth a watch if you can go find it. It's worth a watch. So basically, I went through a lot of stuff, Matt, and I kind of compiled. I took the best bits of a lot of stuff and compiled a story almost around Kevin Steen's thoughts around this match and his first run of Ring of Honor. So I felt the fun thing to do would be, I'm going to recap Steen and Generico's first run of Ring of Honor, which we've already covered match by match on through the years, but I'm going to kind of recap and see why it didn't work out. And I have some new comments from Kevin Steen from all my research that we didn't have for those shows. And then I have a longer little transcribed piece from not word for word transcribed, but recapped, where Kevin Steen really tells the story of getting back to Ring of Honor, which I think is really fascinating. So Matt, obviously chime in for any bit of this, but I'm going to kind of start with, in 2004, Steen and Generico attended the Weekend of Thunder Night 1 show for Ring of Honor. That was the show where Jushin Liger wrestled Bryan Danielson. And Kevin Steen says, I thought this was interesting because he's always been on the record that he wasn't a all-around wrestling fan until he got into the business. He just grew up on WWF. He says that show that he and Generico attended was not just the first ROH show he had ever seen live. It was the first ROH show he had ever seen, period. And he and Generico came to the show to try and get bookings. And so they see Punk backstage, and they knew Punk from elsewhere. And they who do we give this to? And Punk apparently told him, points out Gabe and says, this guy runs it, give him the tape to him. Gabe gets the tape. He watches it. He gets back to them and he says, hey, I'd like to book you, Steen, to be a weapon of mass destruction for Prince Nana at Final Battle 2004. Steen agreed to that. He ends up getting hurt. Generico takes a spot. And then, Gabe keeps him in mind and starts booking them in 2005. And we start with, there was a Do or Die 4, which was an afternoon card that was a pre-show card that I think eventually made some kind of odds and ends DVD. And Generico's match was a 4-way dance where Fast Eddie Vegas defeated Eric Cannon, El Generico, and Josh Daniels in 1929, and B-Boy defeated Kevin Steen in 1353. They both end up getting continued work off of that. Their next show would be the Trios Tournament, where Generico's match was the Rottweilers of Homicide, Ricky Reyes, and Rocky Romero defeated El Generico and the Ring Crew Express in 8:45. And Steen's match was being in a random-ass 6-man mayhem. Azrael defeated B-Boy, Deranged, Dixie, Izzy, and Kevin Steen in 11 minutes and 8 seconds. And the interesting thing about this, Matt, Steen says Gabe originally told him that he was booked for the trios tournament. He was going to be on the team with Spanky and James Gibson. And then the very next day he calls him and goes, actually, no, you're going to be in a six-way. Like, Steen sounds pretty disappointed by it. Nigel ended up taking a spot on the trios team. But Steen that team, if you remember, would have wrestled the team, which was Bryan Danielson, Samoa Joe, and Vordell Walker. And that match got like a lot of time. So it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if Steen got that shot. Instead, we go to ROH Stalemate. Roderick Strong beat El Generico in 11:39. And then Vordell Walker beat Kevin Steen in 8 minutes, 4 seconds in a match Kevin Steen hated. I think on rewatch we said it wasn't as bad as Kevin Steen remembered, but he remembered it being not good. This show was, of course, famous for it's the show we've told the story before. I've told it very famously where Steen has told this a bunch of times where Gabe did not say you absolutely can't wear a t-shirt wrestling, but he kind of said, if it'd be better, if best, if you don't wear a t-shirt. And then on this show, Punk got on the PA before the show started and said, Kevin Steen, this is God, don't wear a t-shirt, something to that effect. And Steen says, I just took it as a good-natured rib. And, he ends up not wearing a t-shirt and then having this bad match with Vordell Walker. And then he comes back through the curtain. He sees Punk and he says, you happy now? And Steen says, I didn't mean that as anything. I meant that's just kind of joshing. Punk ends up really yelling him, chewing him out. It became like a little bit of an internet news thing for a while. Steen said, it wasn't I didn't see it as the big deal it blew up into. But then we go to New Frontiers. Homicide defeats Kevin Steen in 12:44, and the Embassy of Fast Eddie and Jimmy Rave defeat El Generico and Sal Rinauro in 11:34. Then we go to Fate of an Angel. Homicide beat Azrael, Dixie, and Kevin Steen in 8:39. Austin Aries defeats El Generico in 11:25. And then finally we get to a match we never did cover, Matt, which was El Generico beat Kevin Steen at ROH The Homecoming 2005 event.
And this was a match I actually did see because I was there.
Yeah, so you saw it. I did. To this day, I've not seen, even though it did eventually make a Ring of Honor Kevin Steen compilation. But Kevin says that Gabe told him at the time that it didn't make the DVD because of the Daniels Punk match on the show going in for an hour. And it's funny because Gabe kind of acts like, is that what I told you? Like, Gabe's almost acting like, well, maybe that was just an excuse. But Steen says, I rewatched it when I came on that ROH compilation. He goes, I don't think the match was bad. There was one fuck up in it where Generico did a leapfrog on me a minute in and he kind of tripped on me. But he says, I felt like when Gabe put me against each other on this show, which was supposed to be the opener, he felt like it was a huge test from Gabe. Like, are you guys going to go balls out in the opening spot on the card, or are you going to be smart? He says Punk even came up to them before the match, and he said to both of them, he says, like, I want you guys to do good, but also he said to them, like, have a brain. So I guess in other words, like, don't go too crazy in the opener. And Steve mentions, like, the first match me and Generico ever did that put us on the map was in the U.S. was a 4-way between Sexy Eddie, El Generico, me, and XS69, all guys from Canada.
I've only seen highlight reels of that match. I never saw the full match from beginning to end, but the highlight reels make it look very exciting.
Yeah, I remember that being like a big, like, download this on Kazaa, this highlight reel of that match. Well, before it was easy for things to be gift kids, or gift, as Matt might say. But that match happened in CZW, and
before you had Twitter posts that were just like an entire match with all of the down spots edited out, so the 30-minute match actually lasts like 90 seconds.
Yeah, but Steen says, that match at CZW where we made our name, that was a match where we just went crazy and we did everything we could, like just, no thought for anything else. And Steen says, me and Generico at this point for this show, this Steen versus Generico match in Ring of Honor, we didn't know what to do. Like they were wondering, should we go conservative for the match? Like they seem to be kind of hinting that we should do, or should we just say fuck it and try and do everything? And he says we ended up going conservative, and Steen says again, I thought the match went decently except that one botched spot, but he says if I could go back in time I would have worked that match balled out. And Gabe at this point, because
sorry,
you go on.
Well, isn't that a critique that we've had a lot from ROH undercards in 2005 and a little bit in 2006, which was the undercards were a bit too conservative considering what ROH's reputation was supposed to be, that there were a lot of matches that just underperformed because everyone was trying to be deferential to the top matches, and so they did not really show what they could do.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before, right? Where there was this reputation for Ring of Honor of like, oh, they burn out the crowd, they go crazy on every match. And that wasn't more the Indies or Ring of Honor or PWG till years later. Like the era we've covered so far, particularly like you said, in this period, 2005, there was a lot of holding back on the undercard.
Yeah.
There was a lot of consideration.
We complained about it. Like these undercard matches got like boring a lot of the time.
Yeah, and Steen has said in a bunch of the shoot interviews I watched, he said like he feels like one of the reasons why maybe this first run didn't work out. It's because a lot of times it was like him being told, your third match on the show, don't go too crazy. And so he was like, kind of constrained. And so, yeah, Gabe tells him like this conversation happened during the Gabe Kevin Steen shoot interview, and Gabe says, I don't know if you guys going all out would have helped you at the time, but Steen just tells him like, I think it would have helped us more than us being conservative, and I have to feel like I agree. It's better to ask for, what's the saying? It's better to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission.
Yep.
You probably just should have tried to steal the show and hope they forgave you. But that brings us to the last show they worked on this run, which was Dragon Gate Invasion. Homicide beat El Generico in 1402. And then in a four-corner survival, Chad Collier beat Davey Andrews, that's a blast from the past, Jimmy Jacobs and Kevin Steen in 1034. And Steen tells the story on Shoot Reviews where he says, like, I basically knew going into the show that this was going to be the last show we were going to be booked for Ring of Honor. And so I decided to go fuck it and show my personality for the first time in ROH. And he says, I think I got more over in that match than the rest of my matches in Ring of Honor combined. And then we were done. And so Steen says he and Generico viewed this first Ring of Honor run as a failure, but they were really over in other places they worked, like PWG. In fact, they were getting so over that they started to get booked elsewhere, like in Europe. So they started to feel like maybe we don't need ROH anyway. It just wasn't for us, maybe. But then he says the CZW Ring of Honor feud started, and once Super Dragon got booked for ROH during that, they started to feel like, well, if Super Dragon's going to go there, well, we want to go there too. And he says that's the point where they started messaging Gabe, and Steen asked Gabe for like, hey, can we do something? Steen then at that point asked Gabe for permission to do his own little CZW ROH feud offshoot angle in CZW himself, because Steen says at the time he legitimately hated CZW so much that his idea was to do this angle where what if he was the one guy in CZW while they were feuding with ROH that like openly wanted to jump to ROH, that like hated CZW. And in the shoot interview with Gabe, they talk about one of the uncomfortable parts. Gabe like openly tells Kevin that like all these years later that he admits to him that like, I was so pissed. I said yes that you could do that, but I was so pissed. And she's like, why? And he goes like, why did you let me do the angle if you didn't want me to do it? And Gabe basically says, I wasn't going to say no to your idea because it was a really good, cool idea, but I was pissed off because Gabe says, I was saving that idea for myself eventually, because he says, eventually I wanted to do an angle where someone in Ring of Honor was going to like, say I want to go to WWE. He says at one point it was going to be Brian Kendrick to do that, but they never got the chance to do it. But Gabe then kind of backpedals and he says, I blame myself, because he goes, Raven taught me that if you get an idea for an angle, do it quickly, because otherwise someone else is going to get an idea for something similar and beat you to the punch. He says, it's my fault. And Gabe then stresses, I wasn't pissed at you in specific, Kevin. Like I was pissed at myself. And if I didn't like you, I wouldn't have even let you do the angle. And the fact that I let you do the angle shows that like, I wanted to stay on good terms with you. Steen's idea was that he was going to do this mini angle in CZW so well that Gabe would bring him back to ROH, but it didn't happen. He and Generico kept asking Gabe if he had any dates for them. Gabe kept saying no. Steen says he and Generico kept asking Gabe if they had dates for them, but they had never thought to ask Gabe what they should do for Gabe to want them to come back. Like, is there something specific? And he says eventually Generico thought of that and actually did. He emailed Gabe saying like, is there anything we can do that would get you to want to book us again? And Steen says Colt Cabana, who who was friends with at this time, ended up telling him that like Gabe really appreciated that you took that kind of initiative. Like Gabe was impressed that someone actually went up to him and was like, what could we do? Not just could you book us, but like what could we do? But then more time passed. And before we get to that, I first want to quickly go over that first run Ring of Honor. When I go back and run over those matches, Matt, I feel like Gabe gave El Generico more chances than Steen. If you look at the matches I just ran down, Steen's in a lot of like multi-mans, where Generico, both guys get a singles match with Homicide. Generico also gets matches with Aries and Strong, right? So to me, that's more of a shot.
Yeah, although that Homicide match, I'd say, was decently significant, like in terms of like time and like it wasn't just a squash.
Yeah.
So that I think was Steen's biggest chance, that Homicide match.
I think the big thing is all of those matches were somewhat disappointing. Like I remember the Generico matches against Aries and Strong were like good, but not great. And I think each of them had like one prominent Generico botch where I felt bad, where he would like slip or something on something he normally does. I felt like the Homicide matches each guy had were disappointing. You know, they were fine in the multi-mans and tags, but those matches, they weren't really going to be able to like really make too much of an impression. And I feel like my guess is it probably does come down. They were put in a lot of positions, like you were saying, where you're told not to steal the show. Like that, because what we see now on this run is completely different, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, immediately.
Yeah. Oh, and that brings us to the last chunk before we get to the match, which is this is an interview Steen did. I think probably his best shoot interview. He did this for Smart Mark Video, and it's a long one, and it's a really good interview where he's in really good spirits and talks about his whole indie career up to that point. And he kind of goes over the story, and I'm going to go a little further back than just ROH stuff because I feel like it's really fascinating, the winding road it took him to get back to Ring of Honor. So we're going to be in this section of how Steen and Generico get back to Ring of Honor with the obvious start point, Matt, which is California indie wrestler Chris Bosch. Kevin on the shoot, he's talking about how like Bosch did this tour with Dragon Gate, and he says, well, maybe Dragon Gate didn't love Chris Bosch. Bosch had a great experience. He was coming back telling everyone that like it was a great experience for me. And he told everyone, like, I got that tour. I just sent in a tape to Dragon Gate and they liked me and they booked me for a few dates. And Steen says, at that point, he had only worked one show in Japan ever up to that point. And that was a single 0-1 show that Steve Corino brought him in for. And he said, I really enjoyed that show. So Steen decides, I want to work in Dragon Gate too. So I want to go back to Japan. So he sends in a tape. Shima watches Kevin's tape. He really likes it a lot. He sends him an email telling him that he really liked it. And a couple weeks later, Shima asks Steen, like, could you basically work 2 months straight in Japan for Dragon Gate? And Kevin was like, shocked by this because he was like, Chris Bosch was only in for like a week. And so I didn't expect to be offered that kind of length of time. And so I was like, oh boy, that's a lot of time for me to spend in Japan in one chunk. But he says, I still immediately said yes. And so Steen does the 2 months in Japan, and he says he enjoyed everything there, everything in the ring he loved, but he notes that he was there for 52 days, and during that time, they worked 25 shows. So basically, half the time he was there, they weren't wrestling. And he says he spent that time with Jack Evans for most of it. And he says the first week there, we did 3 shows and then had 4 days off. And me and Jack got shit-faced every night during that stretch. Kevin says he wasted like $1,000 on booze during that stretch. He says it was insane. And he says, I knew like at that point I couldn't keep doing that. So I started only going out once a while. But then I realized there wasn't much else to do to occupy my time, and I really started missing home. And he compares it to this run he had right before the Dragon Gate tour, where he did a 3-week tour of Italy, Germany, and England. But he says, I wasn't homesick for a second on that tour because I always had things to do, be it sightseeing in Italy or being able to do whatever I wanted in England because I spoke the language. He says in Dragon Gate, they stayed in Kobe, which was a tiny place with not much to do other than getting shit-faced with Jack Evans. Kevin, again, like he puts over how much he really enjoyed working with the incredibly talented roster in Dragon Gate, but he realized he didn't get into wrestling to make a career in Japan about a month in, and he just realized at that point, I'm really ready to come home, but he still had like almost another month left. Steen says during the stretch, at one point, Jack left for a week to shoot Wrestling Society X, and they had 6 straight days off from Dragon Gate. And Steen says he was so lonely, he was literally losing his mind and must have spent $700 on phone cards calling home every day because he was so homesick. So before the tour ends, Dragon Gate tells Steen, we want you back full time. We really like you. Anytime you want to come back, we'll book you. Steen says yes, and he was booked to go back in February, the month of the show. But he also realized, like, I don't really want to go back. Like, I don't want to go back to Japan. But he figured in more time he would. So he just told them now is not the time, next tour. But he says someone saw Kevin Steen's work in Dragon Gate, and that was Gabe Sapolsky. Gabe got in touch with Steen and said, ROH has a booking for you in February, which is this show, the one against the Briscoes. He says, tells Kevin, it's just a one-off booking. It could lead to more, but right now I'm only booking you for this one show. Steen says he thinks he probably would have made a good living working in Dragon Gate. He points out that the example of Pac, who worked there full-time for years and made enough money to buy a house. But Kevin says, I never wanted to live in a foreign land. I wanted to live and wrestle in North America. So he asked Dragon Gate, like, could I have an extra month or 2 before I returned? Dragon Gate says yes. Then the ROH booking that we're about to cover goes well. ROH gives him more dates. Kevin Steen's wife gets pregnant, so he doesn't want to leave her. And so Dragon Gate kept asking, he says, every couple of months, and I kept saying no until eventually they just gave up on me, which is maybe not the best way. He basically ghosted Dragon Gate. Steen says those 2 months of Dragon Gate were instrumental to getting him to where he is today, and he enjoyed everything about it but the loneliness. And then he talks about this match, and he says, Kevin gets asked, how was Gabe on this second run with ROH? And Kevin says it was different immediately for the first run because this time on the Briscoes match, Gabe booked them to steal the show. He says, when we got there, Gabe told us, you have 20 minutes, go nuts. He says that was a huge difference over the first run there where we might be told you have 8 minutes and you're the third match, so you need to keep that in mind when you're working. He says this time it was literally just go nuts, whatever. The Briscoes go over. The rest is up to you guys. And Kevin remembers it as being a really good match, a lot of fun. He remembers at one point when Mark Briscoe kicked out of sign, Kevin looked at the crowd in disbelief. And that moment he says he could see fans high-fiving. And he says, I call that that was a great feeling for me. He says, it was such a contrast from my first run there, where as soon as we walked back from the curtain from the match, Gabe immediately walks up to us and tells us excitedly, you guys did great. You're booked full time with Ring of Honor. We'll work out the dates. You're going to be on all the shows coming forward. And then he says, and quickly after that, we got the ROH, got the pay-per-view deal, and they started giving out full-time guaranteed contracts, and we talked that. And, so the last little bit here, there's a really cute moment that kind of ends this, where during the Sapolsky and Steen shoot interview, Steen actually tells Gabe this story, which this is Kevin Steen being adorable, where he goes, we've been covering on recent shows, Gabe booked El Generico back for ROH for those couple of shows late in 2006 before he ever booked Steen for this show tonight. And so he remembered seeing Generico getting booked again at ROH and when he wasn't, and he was so bummed out. He remembered telling his girlfriend, fuck ROH. I don't give a shit about them. Let Generico do it. I don't care. Good for him, but I don't give a shit. I don't need them. And he was saying, I wasn't reading the results for Ring of Honor shows, even though I really was. And I was just saying, fuck ROH. And he goes, right after I come back from the Dragon Gate tour, I'm at a restaurant, eating at a restaurant with my girlfriend, and I get a text from Gabe, you telling me I want to book you and Generico against the Briscoes. And Steen excitedly tells his girlfriend that ROH wants me there in February. And she says to him, I thought you said you didn't care about ROH. And Steen says, I just told her, well, I fucking lied. I do want to be there. And he and Gabe start laughing. So it was a very cute little story. So all that being said, Matt, this was basically the match that got Steen and Generico their ROH jobs. And when you see all their ring of ROH, led to, this is a hugely important match in their careers. What did you think about it?
Oh, you threw it to me. I thought you were going to go for it. So, no, this is good. I've been waiting to talk about this. Because, it's pretty clear this was a pretty monumental match for these two guys, Kevin Steen and, El Generico, but it was also a pretty monumental match for ROH because this was one of the feuds that carried them through the year. Steen and Generico was a rivalry and partnership that would carry them for a few years. Kevin Steen was one of their top stars for many years, and both of these two, I think, their ROH runs parlayed into them getting into WWE, and now they're two of the biggest stars in professional wrestling of the past decade, so in mainstream stars. So a lot can be traced back to this match. And the funny part is, I think a lot of us that were here on this night, which I was, a lot of people at the show probably would have told you right then and there that we kind of knew something important had just happened. I don't know if that sounds plausible or if that sounds like us just or me tooting my own horn, but I think it seemed pretty obvious. I don't know if you could tell from the crowd reactions. It was pretty clear that something special was happening. Kevin Steen said that he looked at the crowd and saw the reaction after a kick out, and he said it was a great feeling. But did you notice that the crowd was pretty raring to get these two guys over right off the bat with Mr. Wrestling chants and things like that? Did you notice that everyone was pretty raring to go for this match in the crowd before it started?
Yeah, and Generico, I feel like on recent appearances, he's always maybe just the Olay song, or maybe it's Generico, but he's always been a bit more over than you'd expect for a guy that hadn't really shined yet in Ring of Honor. So yeah, I felt they were into them right from the get-go. But also there was another moment where Steen does one that like senton or that dive to the floor. And afterwards, everyone's chanting Mr. Wrestling, which was a catchphrase for Steen back then. And you can see him look to the crowd and just take it in for a minute. Like it's another one of those moments where, like you just said, like, it's one of those that this is actually a big part of my notes where like you hit on exactly what I felt like, where it's one of those matches where you can realize people's lives are changing in the match. And I think you see with Kevin Steen, if you watch him in that moment, there's a couple moments like that in the match, the one he mentioned and the one I'm just talking about, where like you can see him pause for a second and take it all in. Like you watch this match and you see a guy realize like, oh, this is working. Like this is not like last time.
But also, like, Steen was raring to go, like, right at the beginning. Like, if you watch, like, he was just, first of all, it was interesting to see how he looked here. Because, like, obviously, like, older and bigger than he did in 2005, but still young, like, he's still wearing the singlet without the t-shirt because he's not a made man in ROH yet. But he just seems very energized. And I think that, as great as Generico is, this was Steen's match. Mark Briscoe too, because Mark always just goes out of his way to steal any show that he's a part of to this day. But this was Kevin Steen's match. He was really just feeling like something special was happening. Like, I don't know. The crowd was just extra with him here. He felt like he was feeding off of them a lot, and everyone in the match was great. I mean, the Briscoes really felt like they were motivated to keep up with the athleticism of Steen and Generico here. Briscoe, Mark in particular, was pretty much going through every big move that he could. At one point, Steen gets a hot tag, and it's great. He does a missile drop kick, does a power slam, does a cannonball senton, and just screams to get the crowd on his side. He's done that a few times. He just like screams and like, because he's just, I don't know. He's just really feeling it on this night. I don't know how else to describe it. He's like turned up to 11, kind of like Samoa Joe was at that In Your Face show the year before, where he knocked out Kenta. But only I don't think Steen does anything dangerous here to other people. Maybe just to himself, honestly. He's really pretty much doing whatever he can to show what he can do. Hits the swanton. They do the big spot where they all hit big moves, including Generico dropping Jay Briscoe on his head in a suplex, and then Steen powerbombing Mark, and all of them collapse, and that leads to the crowd chanting "Ole, ole, ole." I would say by this point, Steen and Generico are the favorites, even though there is a "Let's Go Briscoe" contingent. But the Steen and Generico chants are a bit louder. There's a spot where Mark and Jay go for that little Splash Mountain neckbreaker combo, but Steen pushes Jay into Mark to break it up, and then he does the apron powerbomb on Jay, which is, a pretty big move to do when you're just pretty much coming in on a one-off. And so then we just have, it's kind of like Mark versus the two of them. And Steen goes for the moonsault. Mark moves, but Steen lands on his feet. And Generico immediately follows up with the yet unnamed haluva kick. And then he dives onto Jay. Steen hits the frog splash onto Mark. Mark kicks out, which gets a huge pop. ROH chant. Steen sells the kick out total NXT style. So he was always WWE made. He was like, how could this kick out have happened? He doesn't yell no like Brent Albright did on the show before, but close enough. So then Mark escaped the package pile driver, hit the cutthroat driver, and then the Briscoes hit that shooting star press leg drop combo on Steen and got the win. Crowd goes nuts. Total statement match. Performance was perfect from Steen and Generico. The Briscoes are right there with them, made them look like they belong. These two teams would have better matches than this, with deeper stories and more intensity. But on this night, this felt super duper special. It's definitely a great match. I would say the only tag matches that we've seen recently that I liked more than this were the Briscoes versus Aries and Strong from Unified, and the Briscoes against Kings of Wrestling from Final Battle. But other than that, this is pretty high on the list of the better ROH tag matches that had happened up to this point. And I think probably the only matches that would top it in the near future would be other Steen and Generico versus Briscoe's matches. So we have that to look forward to because it's going to be a great feud. But this was a great way to start it. And yeah, like I said, the big thing was it just felt like something special was happening. You know, it just felt like stars were being born here. And I think that's a great feeling, especially when you're watching indie wrestling, because that's one of the things you want, you know. So it was exciting to see. Also, just as somebody who watched a lot of ROH, it was nice to finally see them starting to have more of these balls to the walls undercard matches, because it makes the shows better when you have great undercards as well as great main events.
Yeah. So this might be interesting. I'm a little bit more down this match, and I think it might be a victim of I have not rewatched this match in so long, and so the legend and the story of this match and my memories at the time are so high of it that it almost could not help but like disappoint compared to my memories. I still think this is a very good match. I'd put it at like 3 3/4 stars, like close to 4, but not quite. You said it was the best ROH tag other than Aries and Strong versus the Briscoes at the UK and the Kings of Wrestling went at Final Battle, and I would agree. I might also put the Davey Richards Matt Sydal Briscoes tag from the second half of the UK. I think that turned out to be like a really good, great, like crazy spot fest kind of Briscoes tag.
Yeah, I like this one better. Just felt more focused to me, but fair enough. Fair enough. It's a minor difference.
Yeah, they're not far off, but it's still really good. And first, I have to say before anything else, I have to say, given the legend of Steen being mocked online and in Ring of Honor for wearing a T-shirt, it's hilarious to me that in his return, he's wearing the singlet, and El Generico wrestles this whole match wearing a red T-shirt.
Yeah, that's the other thing that I had totally forgotten was that Generico had a T-shirt on for the whole match, which is very unusual for him. He must have had something going on with his skin or something.
Either that, or maybe it was a little bit of a wink and a okay, Steen's not going to wear a T-shirt. I'm going to wear it. I'm going to wear a Tito Santana red T-shirt.
Yeah, that could have been it. Although that's quite a bold move to tease the booker like on the day of your big break. I don't know about that one, but maybe.
So this match, it isn't unique in terms of how it's worked. It's not a match telling a story. It's all action, but not quite insane, breakneck pace into the final minutes. It starts hot, ends with a big final 5 minutes where everyone is in and out and doing shit. So in other words, it's a mid-aughts Briscoes match. It's a mid-aughts, indie big-time tag team match. But I think this match shows just how badly ROH's tag division and really ROH as a whole at this point was just crying out for fresh names, because just seeing two fresh faces who could hold their own against the Briscoes, match them move for move in terms of having really fast-paced match, having really dynamic offense that was new to some of those fans, and being able to have a really fun stretch run with them. You could see, like, you talking about the crowd, you could see the crowd was just craving that, like craving new things and a new hot act to get behind and be like, we're on the ground floor of something again. The roster was getting a little stale with a lot of guys we had known for quite a while. And like you were saying, like part of the fun of the indies is being like with people on the way up, right? And finally, here was another big act in Ring of Honor where on show one of this new run for them, you're like, oh, they're going somewhere. Like there's the moments we talked about where it seems like Steen is aware of taking it in, like aware in the middle of the match. As I often do with Generico, I notice the selling, like I always say, it verges on being a little too over the top at some points. Like he literally flops around on the mat like a fish out of water, and I don't mind that. You have to pick your spots for that, though. But I always notice his ability to be in the moment and get sympathy and find little touches is so good. Like there's a moment in this match where he's in a submission that's like around his windpipe, and after it gets released, he's gasping for air. And it's little things like that he will do that so many wrestlers, like after they get released from the submission, they would just stand up. But he's like in the moment. He's like, okay, I'm going to gasp for air. I'm going to be kind of like struggling. And I love that about him. You don't see a lot of the personality and crowd interaction Sting would be known for here. He does, like you said, a lot of screaming and aggression, but he does quite a bit of flying here too. And I think people that if you just know modern Kevin Steen, you might be kind of surprised to see that, like, yeah, he still does some high flying today, but kind of one of his things around this time was being a little bit of a bigger guy who did like a fair bit of flying, with, the senton to the floor, the flying drop kick, the frog splash. And one thing I think this match really does well is it ends at its peak. Like, this is one of the easiest mistakes to make in a match like this, where you have plenty of time and you really want to make an impression and earn a job. And honestly, they probably could have gotten away with missing their peak by a couple of minutes and been fine. Because in fact, when I was watching this match, I was almost like, man, you just hit a new level. I would have loved to see another minute or two at this. But there's this sequence late where Steen gets a big near fall after a series of moves. And like, the match has just reached this new level of crowd reaction. And then almost immediately after that, they go to the big finish where the Briscoes win. And I felt like you ended right when the crowd was at its hottest. Like, you talk about making a good first impression, that's a good way to make a good lasting impression, where you just end, like, it probably was better to leave the crowd wanting just a little bit more like that, where it's like, fuck, you guys are just insane. And, yeah, I thought this was a very good match, but I thought the fun of it was what you talked about. And I agree with you 110%. It's a match that you watch it. I don't think, Matt, you said, like, was it just me? I think you feel that significance watching. And, maybe I'm a little biased because rewatching it, I know exactly the significance of this match. But I think you feel it in the match, like you said. Like, what this match reminds me of, there's this match in PWG in 2014. It's a Cedric Alexander versus Andrew Everett versus Trevor Lee. And it was the opener of a PWG show. Everett and Lee hadn't wrestled in PWG before, and they hadn't really broken through to the top tier of, like, the super indie map yet. I haven't seen that match in years, so I don't know how well it would hold up, but I remember at the time really liking it. And I remember with the crowd's reaction, I remember thinking by the end of that match, like, knowing, like, Trevor Lee and Andrew Everett are made in PWG. Like, they have regular spots here now. And they did. They had regular spots going forward right from that match. And you could tell from the crowd reaction that they were going to. And to me, that's part of the magic of all pro wrestling, but especially indie pro wrestling. Like, it doesn't happen all the time, or even a lot of the time. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to see something where, as it's happening, not after the fact, not retroactively, you're seeing it in the middle of the match, someone's career, like, someone's life is about to change. Like, you can tell by the end of a match or a promo or an angle, like, you have a regular job or your stature with the fans has gone way up. And I feel like that's something that kind of separates wrestling from a lot of entertainment. Like, most regular sports aren't like that, because in regular sports, a middling player can have an incredible game or week or month or whole season, and it doesn't always signal that they're going to sustain. But for some reason, the nature of what wrestling is, sometimes you see a match like this and you just know during the match everything's changing.
It's like Susan Boyle singing "I Dreamed a Dream," but like in front of a live crowd, and just really off the cuff, not planned. There's nobody in the back going, "See, I told you, Simon Cowell, that she could sing." There's no one doing that. Is that a good analogy, Trevor? You're the analogy king, so I need to check with you before I can say that I do a good analogy.
You know what? That's one for, if my dad was still around, that would be one for him, because my dad loved rewatching that. And I whenever I went to see my dad, Trevor, look at this woman sing. Dad, you've shown me this 8 times already. Yeah, but look at her sing. Okay, Dad. Yes. Yes, she can sing, Dad. She has a good voice. Anyway, but I would just say this tag is one of the best examples of that kind of match. And the last thing that makes it special is, unlike other things, the fans help make the moment. Like, if those fans don't react like that, it's still a really good match, but it doesn't probably do quite what it does. But those fans, how they reacted during the match and how they reacted afterwards, helped, I think, get those guys like the really enthusiastic jobs going forwards. And that's another one of the really cool things about wrestling is, as fans, on some nights you can actually change people's lives in a way, and that's really a cool, heavy kind of responsibility. The
only thing I'll say about you mentioning this match not having really a story is, I would say it had an inherent story, and which was Steen's, like, sort of, I don't know, like, his ascension to this place and his realization of it, and the crowd rooting for him and, like, guiding him along on it. Like I said, Generico too, definitely, but Steen even more, because of just felt like a special moment for him. And like I said, that's not just in hindsight. Like, it felt that way. And even if it wasn't, like, the match wasn't worked to maximize that, like, it was just, like, it just came inherent in the match.
Well, Gabe felt that way. Like, we don't even have to wonder, because, again, going to Steen's story, Steen always says the story was Gabe stressed to him, I'm only booking you for a one-off, so, like, don't get your hopes up. Maybe something could come of this if you do well. And as soon as he comes back from the curtain, Gabe is telling him, I'm booking you for everything. Like, Gabe knew immediately that, like, he went from, I'm not sold on these guys to you're regulars, within the span of the match. So, and I think it says something like we were just talking about before. We've talked about this sometimes. Gabe often booked guys. Sometimes he would give guys a big shot right off the jump on their first show in Ring of Honor. Like, my textbook example of that would be Samoa Joe's first match in Ring of Honor was in 2002 in the first Glory by Honor, him versus Low Key, and they just let them go, right? But more often than not, Gabe would book new wrestlers that he wasn't sure of very tentatively because he didn't want them to hurt the show if they didn't turn out to be good. So, you'd get a lot of guys being thrown in an 8 to 10 minute 4 or 6 way, guys being given 5 or 6 minutes, in losing matches, and guys apparently, according to Kevin Steen, being told, like, remember your spot on the card, don't go too crazy. And I think we saw with the first run of Steen and Generico, like, how bad that can be, where you can miss the boat on really super talented guys that other indies at that time were taking advantage of because they were doing, they broke through in CZW. They were beloved in PWG. Like Steen says, they were getting noticed by Europe and Japan. And Ring of Honor was the one company of the major ones that was missing them because the way Gabe did that. But to Gabe's credit, maybe his philosophy changed or whatever. On this show, he does the 180 and he kind of admits he's wrong in a way and says, do everything. And even though he had no plans to book them again, and you see how it pays off. Like, it is a bigger risk because, yeah, if you book the Briscoes in a 20-minute match and against two guys that you're not confident in, and they stink it up, you've like wasted a big spot in the show. It might bring the card down a bit. There could be something like the Irish Airborne had like a 20-minute Briscoes match, and it turned out to be just kind of decent. And I don't know if that killed that show, but it definitely killed their run in Ring of Honor. But you can see the good side of taking that risk here is when it pays off, and it was changed. Like, just how badly did Ring of Honor need these guys when you consider what's coming up, right? Like, Joe's leaving. They're about to lose a bunch of guys with the TNA exodus. Colt Cabana's going to be leaving. Danielson's still going to be gone for a little while. Like, they desperately needed these guys, and they are so lucky they found them when they did. Immediately after the match, the fans give it a standing ovation and then chant, "That was awesome." Dave Prazak is screaming on commentary that you'll only see tag team wrestling like this in Ring of Honor, and says he thinks Kevin Steen and Generico have earned more opportunities in ROH. The Briscoes mime titles around their waist because that's their big thing thrust right now. They're back on the title trail. They leave, and then Steen and Generico get another round of applause from the fans. Steen gets a Steen chant as he struggles to his feet. We then get a "Please come back" chant. Steen said on a shoot interview, he tells Gabe actually on the Kevin Steen show that he did with Gabe that, like, he actually was crying after this match, like phoning his girlfriend afterwards because it went so well and just knowing what it meant. And Gabe actually gets really uncomfortable when Steen tells him that. He's like, "Oh, I don't want to hear that," because he says that, like, I don't like hearing the idea that I have that much power over people, because he says, I remember Mick Foley once telling me that, Gabe, you're juggling a lot of careers here. If you put guys in crappy stuff, it could really affect their entire lives. And Gabe says a lot of people get off on that power basis. Like, that just stresses me out. And it's just another funny moment in this interview where you can tell Gabe's just like, man, why are you telling me that? Because, like, it just stresses me out.
Yeah, but I mean, it would be stressful, but it is true. Like, if you're the booker of something that has that much attention, yeah, you're going to affect a wrestler's career just automatically. It's unavoidable.
And the last thing is I want to end on this segment for is Kevin Steen and El Generico, or Sami Zayn now, and Kevin Owens, I guess. They have had thoughts about the Briscoes, particularly after Jay's passing. So I thought I have one quote from each of them. So this was something Kevin Steen said right after Jay Briscoe passed away. He wrote on, I believe, Twitter or Facebook, one or the other. He wrote, "There are a few people in this industry that I consider pillars of my own career. People I truly feel I would not be where I am today had I not encountered them. Jay and Mark Briscoe are two of those pillars. In 2007, they had the opportunity to either to make or break two Canadian guys that were trying to put themselves on the map on the U.S. indie scene. I remember walking up to Jay that afternoon before our match and asking him what he wanted to do. Never met him before. First interaction we ever had. He heard my question, looked at me with a huge smile across his face and said, 'Well, shit, man, let's go out there and fucking kill it.' So we did. We did that night, and we did many times after that. Each match I had with them stands out in my memory among the thousands of matches I've had in my career, because working with the Briscoes was special every single time." And then Sami Zayn wrote just this year, I think a few months ago, he wrote, the Briscoes are the best tag team of the past 25 years and on a short list for the best of all time. At least a dozen top wrestlers today will tell you the best/toughest tag matches of their careers were with them boys. I wouldn't be here without them. So clearly these guys, it meant a lot to them too. I have a live event comment from a listener wrote into us, Jonathan Jankowski. He wrote in and he wrote to us, at the time, I never heard of Generico or Steen. He attended the show live. My dad's reaction during the entrance was, quote, ugh, the Briscoes are wasting a match with a fat guy and a white dude in a mask, unquote. 5 minutes in, Steen and Generico are doing moves I never saw before. The match is moving. They are keeping up with the Briscoes. Generico hits his DDT through the turnbuckle and Steen hitting so many moves off the top rope and immediately became a favorite of mine. My dad went from groaning during the entrance to screaming with the audience after the match, please come back. And I feel like that's a reaction a lot of people have had. I remember watching a match years ago, like on WWE with Kevin Steen or Kevin Owens, and someone that is not a wrestling fan like walked in the room and just said, who's that fat guy with the t-shirt? He's not a wrestler, is he? And for all I hate trolls who said that about Kevin Owens, he did get that reaction sometimes. And I think it's so cool that like he overcame that and he did it his way, right?
It's very alien to me because I know people react that way, but it's just not how I ever have looked at wrestlers. Like it's just not something that I would ever think. But yeah, I mean, clearly it's true. Clearly people do expect a certain presentation from wrestlers, and he did not fit it.
And then finally, we have a quote from Brian Alvarez in Figure 4 Weekly, that snarky thing I did not enjoy. Brian wrote, El Generico, who always has the best match on every show, except for a lot of shows that he works, such as this one, teamed up with Kevin Steen to lose to the Briscoes, said to be excellent. So for those who are wondering why Brian's being snarky like this, Brian had a friend back then named Jubbs, and they would go on road trips with him, and Jubbs was a huge El Generico fan, and Brian was like skeptical, like Jubbs was convinced El Generico was the best wrestler in the world, and Brian was skeptical of it. And so for a while, I feel like Jubbs almost poisoned the water for Brian Alvarez, because he would make little digs like that of being like, oh, he's the best wrestler in the world, except, he isn't on so many shows. And it's like, this was the match pretty much most people that watched the show thought by far was the best match on the show. So the idea that Brian's trying to do this dig like, oh, he has the best match on every show except for a lot of shows like this one, nothing was beating this on the show.
Well, I mean, if he was going to say that, he would have to say what was the best match, and he didn't.
And again, Generico had probably a lot. I know he did. He had a lot of what Steen had, which was people looked at this skinny, lanky guy named El Generico with a goofy mask wearing a cape to the ring, and they immediately wrote him off, when in actuality, within there was a point sometime, probably not this exact year, although he was great here, like, where I think he was, by fans who really knew their shit and watched a lot of stuff, one of the top 5, top 10 wrestlers in the world in ring. And there were people that did not see that until way too late, because they judged him by his body, they judged him by his mask, they judged him by his ring name, and you can't judge a book by its cover. So PW Torch wrote at the time how Steen and Generico were immediately booked after this match for Long Island on April 13th, April 14th in Edison, New Jersey, April 27th in St. Paul, April 28th in Chicago. ROH officials were very impressed with Steen's recent performance upon his return to Ring of Honor. And yeah, that's the one thing I guess we should end on, which is, I know I said we were going to end on this before, but sadly, in through the years' time, we're not going to see these guys for a long time, because they had already booked, even though now Gabe was in love with these guys, they had already booked up the rest of the 5th Year Festival and the 2 WrestleMania weekend shows. So we're not going to see these guys for another – there's 6 shows – the next 6 shows they are not on. So in through the years' time, even though we've just been reintroduced to these guys and they hit the ball out of their park, we're going to be a while before we see these guys again. But they will come back, and when they do, they'll be here with us for the rest of the podcast. But – we then join Rebecca Bayless backstage, where she informs us that Colt Cabana was seriously injured during his match tonight. She runs over to Colt and BJ. BJ is saying Colt can't breathe and is urging him to go to the hospital. Colt doesn't appear to be able to talk, and he walks away with a staffer. Rebecca asks Whitmer what's Colt's condition, and Whitmer says, quote, what's his condition? He can't fucking talk. He can't breathe. And I thought it was just like, it was just, for some reason, that just made me laugh. Like it was almost like, oh, no shit. Like, what you just asked his condition? BJ says Jimmy Jacobs has his hands full with Cabana in Chicago, and then BJ gets what's left after that. So, little quick promo there. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I guess just BJ assuming that there'd be anything left of Jacobs after Colt got through with him, so I guess he doesn't have faith in Colt to completely destroy Jimmy Jacobs.
Yeah. And then that brings us to Samoa Joe defeating Jimmy Rave via pinfall in 16 minutes, 9 seconds after the Island Driver. This was Joe's farewell ROH match in Philly. Like I said before, it was supposed to be him versus Davey Richards, but they had to swap it with the Rave match that was originally going to be in Dayton because Richards was hurt. And if you're wondering what music Joe came out to, that's Another Body Murdered by Faith No More and Booyah Tribe, which was his original ROH theme music, which, Matt, we've been doing this podcast for so long, I didn't remember that until I read that somewhere.
Oh, I was
Did you remember?
Oh, yes, of course. I was very excited for that music to come back, both live when I first saw it and now. I was very refreshing, very welcome to hear that again.
So, Matt, because I talk so much, I'm going to let you take first on this match, too, which you're so lucky because this is what a match this is, right, Matt?
Well, no, but I don't think it was bad or anything. I think that it definitely wasn't like A-level Joe, which he has promised, and he did the night before. It wasn't that. And I would also say that it wasn't quite as good as Rave has been recently. It was a little bit disappointing, but now I don't remember exactly, but Rave did suffer an injury in this match, right?
Yeah, this is the match he breaks his jaw.
Yeah, do you remember what spot it happened? Because there were a couple of different moments where I was like, oh, that could have been it.
I was interested. What do you think are the moments? I'd be interested before I tell you.
All right, well, let me go through my notes because I did mark a couple moments down. Like there was a moment early where Rave got his legs swept out while he was on the apron and did like a face plant, and I was like, could it have been then? Then it was like he grabs his face after the ole ole kicks, and I was like, could it have been then? So I'm not completely sure because obviously he keeps working the rest of the match. Did you think it was either of those spots?
I thought it was the ole kicks. It's neither of those spots. So here's the crazy thing about this match. Jimmy Rave breaks his jaw in this match, and he works for a few weeks afterwards all the way because he wants to fulfill the planned end of the Nigel McGuinness feud in England. So he works through it, and I think doesn't even, that's not publicly stated. There might have been like a news story of like, Rave had hurt his jaw, but they don't go into the extent. And then at the end of the Nigel feud, they say, oh, Nigel broke his jaw. But so here's it's not in either of those spots. Do you remember it's kind of a typical spot. Joe is standing on the ring apron and Jimmy is in the ring and he goes to throw like a shoulder block at Joe's midsection where he like leans out through the ropes and Joe dodges it. So Joe's standing on the apron and Jimmy's like head and torso is leaning over the middle rope, like over the apron, and Joe just kind of punts him in the chest. Well, if you look on replay, he actually catches him right under the jaw. And that according to Jimmy on podcasts, that breaks his jaw. And here's the crazy thing. If you watch this match and you don't know that, I don't think you'd come away from this match knowing that Jimmy had been hurt at all in this match, let alone on that spot. Like I went and really paid close attention. He does not favor his jaw after that. He does not grab it after that. Like you would never know he was hurt even. And he works the rest of the match, but apparently that move broke his jaw.
Yeah, how early in the match was that?
I'm not sure. It might have been in the middle, I think. It was probably after the Olay kicks even, I think.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Because he was already grabbing at his jaw after the Olay kicks. So, like, knowing that, it was very disorienting. Because it's like, was it then? Was it then? Was it then? So, it's hard to know how much to, give the match a little bit of leeway knowing about that injury. Because I'd be curious to remember like how late in the match that even happened to where that would have affected the quality of the match. The thing that I noticed just was like it wasn't a squash, definitely not, but Rave was definitely presented as not being on Joe's level, is what I would say. It felt a little bit of a regression for Jimmy Rave, which didn't really make any sense, especially given what a fight he gave Homicide the night before. He seemed like he belonged in that world title match. And here he seemed like somebody who was more of a jobber to the stars compared to Joe's star, I guess is what I would say. And he definitely gets in some offense, but there are just moments where Joe is making Rave look like a little bit of a punk. Later in the match, he gets a little bit more offense. He starts targeting the leg. He starts setting Joe up for the heel hook. Just that first, 40% of the match, it was surprising how much Rave seemed to be minimized in terms of his stature compared to Joe. I would have thought that it would have been a little bit more evenly worked. But, once it gets going, Rave does some, gets some things going on Joe. He does get to, lock in the heel hook a couple times, but the crowd doesn't really buy it. And Joe gets to reverse it and get his own heel hook on. But Rave escapes and gets ST Joe'd. The spot where Rave rakes Joe's eyes, that felt like a little bit of old school cheating Rave. He goes for the pedigree, and then Joe just puts him on the top rope, hits the Island Driver. I did like the Island Driver finish. I liked the nostalgia of the music plus the original finisher. So that was cool. But yeah, it felt like, okay, so here's the thing. So the match I thought was not badly worked. What I thought was, we've said this before, it's one of those matches where they put in physical effort, and obviously Rave, put his whole body on the line. But I don't think the mental effort was there the way it is in Joe and Rave's best matches. It felt just fairly uncreative and boilerplate, unlike the matches from the night before. So I would say, as it stands, it's a solid 3.25 star match. But Joe was promising better than that for his farewell tour. And we've seen that Rave can deliver better than that, especially in the incarnation that he had been in for the past few months. This did not feel like that version of Jimmy Rave. This felt like the version of Jimmy Rave that was on a losing streak in the summer and the fall of 2006. And I was preferring the more recent version of Rave that was kind of a badass. This wasn't that.
Yeah, this is another match where I agree with your thought process, but I'm probably a little harder on it than you. I probably liked it a little less than you, and not that you loved it or anything. This match was pretty disappointing to me, especially because we just saw both of these guys have their best ROH performances in months in separate matches the very night before. So like you were saying, it's kind of disappointing to see both of them kind of regress on this night against each other. The match doesn't have anything new really in terms of new ideas or interesting ideas or dynamics. Rave is not the fast-paced action version of himself we saw the night before, but he also doesn't lean heavy into the stalling psychology heel version either. He only does one little early match bailout. Joe here is playing the hits, I thought, like he often has in his last year or two here in Ring of Honor. But I think he does play the hits here with a bit more enthusiasm than normal. He's a bit more up for it because it's the farewell shows. So I think you saying, he's not quite mentally there, but he's mentally there, but I don't know. Part of him is there, part of them isn't there, is the point. But I think I saw on the last show when we were talking about his Joe versus Morishima, how cool it was to see Joe being challenged again. And this match is the total opposite of a challenge. This is Joe totally in his comfort zone. The first 2/3 of the match is like that, and that's fine because you have to hope it's building to a big finish. And then I felt instead in that final third, it starts going in the opposite direction. Ray starts working over Joe's leg to set up the heel hook, and we recently watched a match Rocky Romero versus Davey Richards that I liked a fair bit. And one thing I liked about it was they saved the limb work for the very end, only the final minute or two. And why that worked is it let them do this really fun, satisfying match up to then. And then they had a big spot to justify the injured limb story. And how they handled it after that spot was really dramatic and fun. And none of that's true here. It's not a big spot that starts the limb work. Rave just dodges Joe on a move and snaps his leg over a ring rope. So it's not a particularly crazy move. And from there, he does a couple low lit impact submissions late in the match. No one in the world, especially that building, was believing that Samoa Joe was going to tap out on his farewell tour to Jimmy Rave to a leg grapevine. And so what we get at this point is where the match should be hitting its highest gear. Instead, it's actually kind of shifting down and losing some momentum, in my opinion. Even Joe, when he gets in the heel hook, is nowhere near as dramatic as you'd want it to be. And it certainly isn't as dramatic as Homicide and Rave made it the night before. Joe doesn't even really sell the leg that much during the match. It doesn't really prevent him from doing things during the match. And when the match ends, it felt like an anticlimactic wrapping up of things rather than a real build to a crescendo. That said, like you, I really did like Joe breaking out the Island Driver, one of his early finishers. That is the kind of thing I I want to see on a nostalgia like farewell tour, like these little bits of like winks of like, hey, if you've been with me since the beginning, like I'm reaching back into the cupboard, for you guys. And yeah, like I said before, this is the match also that Jimmy breaks his jaw on. Overall, I thought this was technically fine. I'd call it like a basic above average match. It's Joe by the numbers with maybe a little more gusto behind it, but not a ton more. For Joe's farewell in a major market, I would really have wanted more, even from these two guys. It didn't feel like they were holding back. It just felt like this match was too straightforward in a bad way. Like I was just crying out to see anything novel or anything like that. But one other thing I want to mention, Lenny Leonard on one point on commentary says the heel hook has taken out every single man Jimmy has put it on. He had just called a match the night before where Jimmy had Homicide in the heel hook. That Jimmy did not win.
Well, I'm going to be technical here. He said it's taken out every man he's put it on, and he did beat Homicide with it in a match. So it counts, I think, if you want to be technical. Did he beat Homicide
with a heel hook? Wasn't that with like a small package or something?
He didn't beat him with the heel hook in Long Island at Black Friday
I don't think he did. I think that was a pinfall upset. I don't think he used the heel hook in that match.
All right.
Also, can I just say, when you said, Lenny said, he's beaten every man that put him down. I thought you were going to say, Homicide isn't a man, he's a real mean hombre, or something like that.
Sounds like something I would say.
Yes, because you're adorable. But after the match, the crowd launches into a loud "Thank you, Joe" chant. Joe takes the mic, and Matt, last show I mentioned, Joe's going to have to do a lot of these farewell speeches. It's going to be tough to, do farewell speeches over and over again. And you said to me, I remember Joe having some pretty good ones. And Matt, as always, you were right, because Joe takes the mic. He says this is probably the last time he'll get to say this here. Philadelphia, welcome to Ring of Honor. A woman shouts that she loves Joe, and Joe says, I love you too, baby, and I'll see you after the show. Joe says, a little over 4 years ago, he walked into Philadelphia with nothing on his back but his wrestling boots and his gear, and today he stands in front of the most hardcore wrestling fans who love this sport. He said these fans have heard it a million times. Philadelphia is the birthplace of hardcore wrestling, but they've got it all wrong when they say that. Philly was not the birthplace of the style of hardcore wrestling. This was the birthplace of the hardcore wrestling fan. This is the birthplace of the people who would only accept excellence and nothing less. The birthplace of people who do not care what the big companies shoved down their throats. They knew what they loved, they knew what they liked, and they told those big companies to go fuck themselves. At this point, the crowd goes absolutely roars at that. It breaks into orange chant. They just love this. Joe says he may have been born in California, but he was forged in the Murphy Recreation Center, in the Viking Hall, and right here in the National Guard Armory. And he was forged and tempered by the fiery passion of all you people out here. Joe says, God bless you all. Thank you for what you've given me. I am Samoa Joe. I love this company. I love this sport. And God damn it, I love pro wrestling. Thank you. And we get another big thank you, Joe chant, and Joe poses for the Philly fans. And I thought, Matt, that was a hell of a speech.
Yeah, and a really great point. I'd never heard that point articulated as well as Joe articulated it right there. That yes, Philly was the home of hardcore wrestling, but what it really means is those hardcore wrestling fans that demand a certain level of quality, and it's not about what the major promotions say should be popular. I really liked the way he put that, and it's true. So good job.
And it is something too, it's another thing. There's been a few little notes of that on Joe's farewell tour already, where that promo was saying, I'm being forced to leave Ring of Honor. Where I don't know if they're quite digs at TNA, but if I was TNA, I'd be a little he's selling this idea of you're the fans that tell the big companies fuck you, but he's saying that while he's kind of saying goodbye to go to a bigger company. But it is that kind of thing where he's kind of putting over Ring of Honor huge in a way where almost. Not to a great comparison for TNA at some points. Maybe that's me looking too much into it, but it is now. I don't think it's wrong though. But it is now intermission, and we join Rebecca Bayless backstage with Jack Evans. Rebecca asked Jack about being laid out backstage last night. She personally thinks Davey Richards did it, but asked Jack if he has any feelings on who might be after him. Jack says he is not the biggest fan of Davey Richards, but he knows where his enemies are at all times, and as a result, he can say without a shadow of a doubt it was not Davey Richards. Now then, that confusingly at this point, yeah. Jack then completely brushes off the attack, saying he's not going to let it get to him.
Yeah, this is very WWE where a person no-sells a major loss. It's what's the point of having the big attack if the person who just got laid out and knocked unconscious doesn't care?
Yeah, he says, I don't care about Davey or who attacked me. Jack says, all I care about is getting the one thing ROH that I have yet to obtain, and that's some gold around my waist. If you thought, I got beat up bad last night, you should see how bad Seidel and Daniels are going to be beaten up tonight. It's going to be a 96 can of whoop ass. So yeah, on one hand, I did like the idea that Jack was so focused on winning a title that he pushed everything else aside. But on the other hand, yeah, it's insane to me that you do a major mystery attacker angle to end the last show, a show that literally happened the night before, and a day later, Jack's acting totally upbeat, like he doesn't even care, and you have him openly say, I don't care who attacked me. Like, what? Like, that goes against every bit of wrestling logic. Like,
yeah, or just logic.
Yeah. And, yeah, I don't know if that was Jack just deciding to take that thrust for the promo himself or what, but it was insane. So next we have the FIP heavyweight title match. Roderick Strong successfully defends the title when he defeats Delirious by countout in 9 minutes, 18 seconds. Before the match starts, Aries comes to the ring. ROH students now dressed up in new ROH shirts that say staff on the back, so all very official now. They try and hold him back. He gets inside the ring. Roderick flees to the outside all the way into the crowd. Eventually they get Aries to return to the back so the match can start. So this match, on a recent show, we saw Mercedes Martinez suffer a serious injury, and the match continue in a way that I felt was unsafe. Leave it to Ring of Honor, Matt, to top themselves as not only was this worse, this was one of, if not the worst handling of a legitimate injury I can remember in all our time doing through the years.
It's the only other one that comes close was that Homicide John Walters match at Weekend of Thunder, right? Where Homicide got knocked out and then they kept the match going. I think this match was possibly worse.
Yeah, I think so too. Although that is a really good poll. These guys are only, for those who aren't watching the match, these guys are only wrestling for a few minutes and then just disaster happens. Like, Delirious is staying on the top turnbuckle. Roddy sweeps his legs out from underneath him, so Delirious has to take a back bump off the top turnbuckle onto the mat, and Delirious, it looked pretty normal, but he must have just hit his head hard on the mat, like just rotated a bit too much, because he immediately rolls on his side, and you can see, and if you listen closely, you can hear Delirious is snoring, like he is out completely cold. This becomes even more evident because seconds later, Roddy covers him and Delirious doesn't raise his shoulder, which just forces the ref to stop the count at 2, which in hindsight, he should have just counted 3 and ended the match right there. Roddy then does a thing I think you should never do with an unresponsive opponent who just suffered a possible head or neck injury, which is he starts trying to yank Delirious up head first off the canvas while he is jerking his head around by the mask. Delirious is clearly not responsive. Eventually, Roderick just throws Delirious to the floor. He has the ref start a count out because this is an FIP match, remember, and this is one of the rare matches in Ring of Honor that has a 20 count where a match could end by countout at this time. And Delirious starts to gain consciousness, and he gets back into the ring at around 10, I think. At this point, there's like a moment or two where Delirious seems like he might be recovering a bit. He even emotes at one point, like kind of Delirious up a little bit. And I think he throws a headbutt of all things to Roddy's midsection, but it's clear he's completely fucked up. Roddy puts him in submission. Eventually, he hits him with a Gibson driver, but Delirious kicks out at 2. Roddy takes Delirious to the outside again, throws him head and shoulder first into the barricade. Great decision. Then pulls down a barricade, and Gibson drives Delirious onto the barricade, goes back in the ring, and finally, mercifully, the match ends because Delirious is counted out in 20. Immediately after the match ends, like a flood of refs and staff check out on Delirious, and even Gabe comes out, so you know it's serious. Delirious is eventually helped up, and he can barely even walk when with 2 people carrying him. And then Roderick Strong attacks Delirious again until Aries comes out again and chases Roddy off. Roddy bolts into the crowd, and he runs all the way to the back of the building, out an exit door. And then Aries joins a million other people hovering over Delirious and checking on him. I have sympathy on how difficult it must be to handle a wrestler injury, but this was fucking horrific to see a guy stone cold unconscious, and then clearly afterwards, even after he starts to regain consciousness, very fucked up to the point of being noticeably physically unsteady on his feet, taking multiple bumps, spots for minutes after this happened. And I get maybe the first count attempt or maybe the first Gibson driver near fall in the ring may or may not have been like attempts for Roddy to try and end the match, and Delirious maybe was just kind of like, no, I can do it. Who knows? But that's why I always think in these situations, the refs need to be empowered and told to stop a match like this immediately when it becomes apparent how serious things are. Because we've talked about this before. Wrestlers generally going to want to tough things out, especially when they're full of adrenaline or foggy headed from a concussion, and you need to take the responsibility out of their hands. If that means from time to time you might make an overly cautious call, or the wrestlers might get really pissed off at you. This match should have been stopped right when Delirious couldn't kick out. Right after he got knocked out.
It should have been stopped as soon as they heard a snore. The thing is, there's precedent. Like in 2003, when Low-Ki got knocked out, or when Dan Moff got knocked out by Low-Ki, that match just stopped. They know to do that. It's very strange that there's been so many instances since then where they didn't do that. And I don't understand it. It just seems so logical. Oh, person's unconscious, stop the match. Especially when the person who would be forfeiting the match is the one that was booked to lose anyway. It gets the heel over anyway. Why did you need to do all this extra stuff? It doesn't make... I still to this day don't understand what they were thinking. I could see a young guy like Roderick Strong panicking, but the ref had more experience. Those Paul Turner, he should have just been yeah, he's out. I'm awarding you the match. That's it. We can't keep going like this. It's crazy. Yeah. It doesn't make. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't think there's a good excuse. I don't really even have much sympathy. It just seems so logical. And there's going to be obviously a reckoning for all this concussion stuff a few months later when the Chris Benoit murders happen, and wrestling finally starts talking about concussions. But boy, it's a long road to get there.
Well, especially I think especially egregious is after the match is over, Roddy going and attacking Delirious again. He screwed up. You don't need to do that. There's no reason to do that angle. That's not important that you just give another shot to Delirious.
But also
could have called it audible easily.
But also the power bombing him on the guardrail, why? He's out. Everyone knew it. Everyone could see it. What's going on?
And we always talk about how the timeline of Through the Years seems to sync up with what's going on in modern wrestling. And not to besmirch Roderick Strong, but I did just read in the last week, Dalton Castle did a interview about his injury, and he talked about he got hurt. What's kept out, he got hurt wrestling Roderick Strong. And he said, I don't blame Roderick for me suffering the injury, but I told him I needed to slow down afterwards, and he didn't slow down. He said, no, you just keep up. And he didn't really have consideration for that. And you could tell that that was coming from a legit place of frustration that he was kind of in this media interview. And I was and literally days later, I'm watching Roderick Strong work with a guy who is in a very bad way and not really protecting him. So crazy how things sync up like that. But the Observer wrote about it goes even worse than it appeared if you're just watching this, because Dave would write in the Observer, Strong versus Delirious for the FIP title didn't go as expected. It was booked to be a 20-minute technical match, but Delirious was knocked out at 8 minutes. Delirious was on the top rope, and Strong swept his leg. Delirious landed in the ring badly on his head and shoulder, and he was out. Strong didn't know what to do, but ended up bringing him outside the ring and gave him a double-arm powerbomb on the guardrail, and Delirious was counted out. He may have gone into a seizure, and he was freaking out backstage because he couldn't remember anything or where he was. About 30 minutes later, he seemed to be okay. I always love that concussion. There were so many stories about concussions back in that day where it's yeah, this guy didn't know, couldn't remember his name, but he was okay 20 minutes later. I was I don't think you can be. I know what you mean, but I don't think you can be okay at that point 30 minutes later. But yeah, that had to have been frightening. A seizure backstage and he can't remember anything. And again, it's insane to think that he had that after the match and he was wrestling with it.
I wonder if,
for minutes.
Not to make light of it, but I wonder if Frank Talent was there to check on him.
I mean, if Frank was at ringside, Matt, none of this would have happened. He runs a tight ship. But that brings us to the ROH World Tag Team title match in the semi-main event. Christopher Daniels and Matt Sydal, scored to the ring by Allison Danger, successfully defended the titles when they defeated Jack Evans and Shingo in 20 minutes, 6 seconds, when Sydal pinned Evans after this neat double-team Angel's Wings, where Sydal grabbed the guy's legs he jumped off the turnbuckles to kind of give it almost like a spike variation. There's a funny moment before I throw it to you, Matt, where after the ring introductions, Jack Evans goes up to Christopher Daniels and says really loudly, wait, Christopher Daniels? I thought this was Professor X after some successful stem cell research.
That's because he's not in a wheelchair. Is that the idea?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, gotcha.
And Jack, then you can see Jack shakes his head like he is so pleased with himself. And I was like, you goddamn dork.
Jack Evans is very talented. I'm not sure if joke telling is one of those talents, but I guess people that hang out with him backstage can answer that better than I can.
It was so adorably bad. Like he was just like, yeah, I thought about that line 4 days ago. That's a good line. And I was just like, God damn. But he's so adorable doing it because he's just so happy that he did that. He was like, he really thought that was a great line. Like he's bald and, stem cells. But
anyway. What's funny is like everybody else, while Jack is so proud of himself, you're just like looking at him like, what? Like, what are you? Christopher Daniels is supposed to be a comic book nerd, right? So he probably got the joke.
Yeah.
But it's not clear that everyone, Matt Sydal or Allison Danger got the joke. And Shingo, I imagine, I don't think his English was that good at that point, but maybe I'm wrong. So.
Yeah, you could see like Jack thinking probably Chris is a big comic book fan and he's going to really pop for this. Everyone just knows Elsa. It's just like, man. So what do you think about this match? Big time spot, semi-main event, 20 minutes for this. It's an interesting spot for Jack and Shingo here.
That last move was very, very good. The double team Angel's Wings. I like that a lot. As for the rest of the match, there were some nice ideas. It was interesting, like to the beginning, where the first spot by Daniels against Evans is he does his side headlock, but he repeatedly switches arms. He's like, I'm going to do a side headlock with my right side, then with my left side, then with my right side, then with my left side. And then Evans escaped, and then he starts like pantomiming that, and he's just like, that's not going to work on me. Like, I thought, first of all, you don't see that very often, and I thought it was just a funny sequence. It was also interesting to watch the early sequence where Jack Evans and Matt Sydal traded like reversals and finesse moves, because it felt like the Will Ospreay and Ricochet version of that sort of sequence where it was like, these are the premier athletic types of the era. And when you watch it compared to those guys now, it seems so much rougher around the edges. Mm-hmm. And it's like, these guys seem smoother than, let's say, like the Special K guys that were doing it a few years before them. And it's just funny to watch the evolution. I mean, obviously like Ricochet and Ospreay, like they're like magicians, like what they do with their bodies and stuff. But there is a charm to not being quite so precise. Do you know what I mean? Like,
absolutely. Yeah. I talked about that before, where like it is technically way better today than it's ever been, like high flying and those spot kind of matches. And I completely agree. I had that same feeling of like, oh, these are two of the top high flyers of the day, and you really do notice a difference. But Jack and Sydal are great, and I even find charm in those Special K guys. Like, even though they are way rougher, like you said, they're kind of like the step before Jack and Sydal and guys like that. But like there was an inventiveness and kind of just we're risking our lives every moment to that I really enjoyed, that maybe we've lost a bit of.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
Jack
like Ospreay, like he can't help being that perfect, but like it is a little bit like, oh my god, like this is just like all the rough edges are sanded off with him,
Yeah, and I get, like, I really like Will Ospreay and guys like that, but I do also, when people don't like that, I can get that too for that exact reason, right? Like, I can at least see, like, I can see it being almost a little too clean for some people.
The struggle is gone.
Yeah.
And like, I think like he does as best he can to kind of cover that up and like reintroduce the struggle, but his motions are so smooth that it's very hard for him. But that wasn't the problem with Jack and Sydal. So it's like, it's not as good, but like, it's kind of nice that it's not as good, I guess is what I would say. And so, but they are having their like house show style match fun. Sydal tries to mock Jack Evans' dancing. It doesn't go well. And even the announcers say he should never do that again. But then meanwhile, Christopher Daniels tries it and Lenny Leonard says, the old man's busting out the robot. And I just note, the old man was 37, which is 4 years younger than I am now. Just saying. This just saying.
Oh, God. and yeah, I posted that online. If you ever want to see a match where Christopher Daniels does his like arms outstretched like sacrilegious baiting the crucifixion pose and turns that into the robot, this is the wrestling match for you.
Exactly. There's also like there's some rough moments here, though. Like, there's definitely a point where, so Jack Evans at one point in the match kicks Daniels in the back when Daniels hits the ropes, and that's a spot where like that allows Evans and Shingo to take over momentum. But the problem is he does it a few minutes before that, probably too early, and Daniels just completely ignores it because it clearly wasn't supposed to happen yet, and possibly Daniels didn't even realize that Jack did it. So that was kind of awkward. But yeah, eventually it works out, and that's when Evans and Shingo start to take over. Evans at one point actually works a seated abdominal stretch, just so that's a new move in the Jack Evans repertoire, which gets the announcer to say he's not just a high flyer; he can get on the mat and go technical too, which indeed he can. But yeah, like there's some cool spots throughout. Evans does this cool like kick flurry and then a standing shooting star press on Seidel, and there's a spot where Seidel comes in to break it up, but Evans moves, so Seidel lands on Daniels. It's interesting to get the heat on Daniels here because, like, in some ways, that team is the one working more heelishly because of Seidel, because Seidel is continuing his character work of just constantly, like, smirking and, like, doing belt motions to get the announcers to be like, we get it, you have a belt, or you have belts, we understand. Like, clearly Seidel was doing the heel side. The one thing I will say, the heat wasn't great in this match. Like, anytime someone had a hot tag, the crowd didn't really react. Down the stretch, they didn't really react that much. The spots with the cool moves, they definitely happened. The flow was not nearly as good as in the Briscoes match, which is unusual because usually the Briscoes is the thing I criticize about their matches in this era was the flow. But I think that with the right opponents, the Briscoes were starting to get a little bit more focused. This was the match that, even though they had the heat sequences and stuff, it just felt a little bit all over the place. And the big moves just sort of felt disconnected from each other. Although there were definitely big moves. There was a spot where Seidel did his leaping top rope rana on Shingo, but Shingo rolled all the way through, hit a buckle bomb, and followed it with the release spitting power bomb, which I thought was really cool. That was one of my favorite sequences of the match. There was a spot where Daniels goes for the best moonsault ever, and Shingo avoided it. Daniels landed on his feet, and then Shingo clotheslined him to the floor, and Evans hit the space flying tiger drop. There was a spot where Shingo and Evans do a neckbreaker combo with Evans springboarding off the top rope into a flip, and then Shingo got Daniels in the torture rack, and Evans did an ode to the Bulldogs moonsault with Seidel standing, and it actually sounded like he hit Seidel really, really hard on the moonsault press. Like it had a loud thump, which you don't usually hear off of a moonsault press. So I don't know if somebody just like did a slap or if he just like really hit Seidel too hard there. Then there was a spot where Evans went for a flying knee. Seidel moved and actually got a backslide, and Evans reversed that into a backslide of his own, and they both cover, and then Seidel kicks out and immediately gets hit with a big lariat by Shingo, which I thought was a really cool sequence. And then that's when Daniels hit the Angel's Wings on Shingo. Evans hit Daniels with a spin kick. Then Seidel went on top. Evans knocked him down with a kick, and then Evans went for a top rope rana, but Seidel holds him up, and that allowed Daniels to hit him and put him in position for that double team Angel's Wings, which I thought was really cool. So, yeah, like I said, a lot of cool moves. I thought just a little bit disconnected. Something was just off about it. I thought, again, another match that I thought overall was good, but disappointing. Somewhere in that like 3.25, 3.5 star range. They tried a lot of stuff. It just didn't all pull together the way that you'd want. The one guy I would say did not seem off is Shingo. I thought everything he did was great in this match. But I thought, I don't know, for some reason, like even though Evans' moves were good, there was just something about it, like it didn't all come together. The match was less than the sum of its parts, I guess is how I would put it.
I'm pretty close to you on this one. I'd probably give it like a flat 3-star good. This match to me was kind of like a poor man's version of the Daniels and Seidel versus Aries and Strong match I liked from 2006, where it's a pleasant, consistent watch where it's talented wrestlers doing things, and there's nothing that's really particularly grabbing me in a huge, really memorable way, but it's somewhat fun from start to finish. I do think you've pointed out some of like the hitchiness to it and some of the flaws. I just like you, I really did like that Jack Evans, Matt Seidel sequence early. In fact, looking at my notes, I wrote basically almost exactly what you said. I wrote here, They work this quick sequence that's definitely nowhere near as smooth and tight as, say, one from Will Ospreay and Pac would be today, but it's energetic and fun, and it's just cool to see them together. So, very much had the same thoughts as you there. Like you mentioned, Seidel's being more heelish here. He's really ramping it up because not just making the million belt motions, but he's also choking somebody on the ropes. He's pulling Daniel's foot onto the ropes to save him when he's being pinned. He's starting to cheat. But I felt like the final few minutes where things are supposed to – another match where the final few minutes where things are supposed to kick it into high gear, it started to get a little shaky. It started with what must have been a big botch because there's a move where Daniel sets Shingo in position for the iconoclasm. Jack charges to counter. We get an awkward cut to Allison Danger at ringside. And when we come back, we see a half second at the end of whatever Jack was attempting. And we just hear a mild groan and a mild boo from the crowd. So that was like clearly ROH seeing a botch so bad they tried to just – cut it best they could. And from there, at that point in the match, everything feels like it's on the verge of falling apart. It doesn't fall apart, but it feels like it could at any moment. Like guys are a little out of position. Shingo at one point is holding someone in a torture rack for probably just a few seconds, but it felt like forever until Jack could get in position to do the ode to the Bulldogs with him. Near the end of the match, you can just see Jack is huffing air at one point. The final spot is cool, like we mentioned, where it's the assisted Angel's Wings, but the final minutes, rather than like building to a peak to me, it felt more like they started to put their foot on the gas pedal, but as they started to push down on the gas, the car started swerving, and they were like, "Whoa, let's get this on the road," and they kind of did, but it was tense. So yeah, overall, I'd give this a good. It has its flaws in execution, and what they were trying to do wasn't particularly amazing, but I thought it was 20 minutes of talented people delivering enjoyable action. I always like Jack Evans, even if this maybe wasn't his best night in the ring. I agree with you. I feel like Shingo on this will be interesting to see if it keeps up, but I felt like on these last two shows this weekend, he really kind of showed more than we've seen so far. Like it felt like he's getting a little more comfortable and in these limited shots. He looked really good this weekend, I felt like. Yeah, and also I just looked up while we were talking. Lenny Leonard, not exactly, but 1 year younger than Christopher Daniels. So how dare he call him an old man? How dare you, sir?
Maybe that was the joke.
Yeah. No, because I know wrestlers in that day, I think before this, like a year or two earlier, like Daniel, like Punk and them would say, and Joe would call Daniels Old Man Daniels. So
yeah, but he was several years older than them at the very least.
I mean, it is partly a joke, but it was like back in that day on that scene, like being a guy in the mid-30s working like the work rate indies, you were like the old man. So after the match, Austin Aries walks to the ring yet again, been all over the show. Jack Evans has grabbed the mic. Jack apologizes to Shingo for the lost night, saying today he was weak because he had other things on his mind. He tells Shingo he has some business with Aries, and he'll tell Shingo, go to the back and we'll talk later. Shingo obliges. Jack leads the crowd in a Shingo chant as Shingo leaves. Jack then says, I'm not that dumb. I know why you're here, Aries, but nothing has changed. I'm not picking sides between you and Roderick. Aries says that's fine. He respects Jack. He respects his talent. Aries says that they kicked it in Japan and gives a very knowing smile, and Jack pantomimes tossing back a drink. So I think one thing we've learned on this episode through the years is between this and the Kevin Steen drinking with Jack Evans story is Jack Evans likes to drink in Japan a lot. Aries says he isn't going to beg anyone to back him up because his track record speaks for itself. He was the leader of a group of 4 of the most talented up-and-comers in the business, and he was leading the way. Aries says if Roddy's got his NRC, he's going to have to scout his own talent, his own diamonds in the rough. He's got to find the next generation of superstars and lead them just like he led each and every one of them. Aries leaves the ring, and Jack takes the mic and says that Aries' leadership did mold Jack into the dog he is today. But if Aries is going to find a new breed and Roddy's going to do his own thing, maybe it's time for him to find a crew to lead himself. Matt, do you think when Aries said some diamonds in the rough, that was going to be the original name for the group, Aries group? And do you think
I definitely thought that the day that he said it. That's for sure.
And do you think Jack's group was going to be called a crew to lead himself?
That was less my opinion at the time.
Dogs I am today.
The dog I am today. The dogs I am today. Like the like the Lone Rangers from the movie Airheads.
Our reference game on this episode cannot be beaten. Grace Under Fire, Airheads, the Joey Lawrence show I've already forgotten the name of, Brotherly Love, whatever. Yeah, you can't beat us. You can't beat us. So I thought this was decent. At this point I was like, okay, this is getting to be too many seconds. But I will say, I do think it did a decent enough job of trying to establish why Jack wouldn't pick a side and would form like a third group of his own. Just the idea of like, they really did if they got one thing across on this show, it was that, Jack just is caught in the middle of these two. He's like the child of divorced parents. And so he's like, he's not going to team with either of them. He's not going to pick a side. He'd rather have his own third side then, because he just doesn't want to pick a favorite. His parents are basically saying, whose home do you want to live with, Jack? And Jack is saying, I'm going to live with my friend Steve. Yeah, so, yeah, exactly. I left that out of the promo, but he said exactly that verbatim.
The one thing I can say about this show, it ain't Andy Barker PI. I was just trying to think of a sitcom that was on in 2007.
What was the other Andy Richter's? That was the one where it was
Andy Richter Controls the Universe?
No, there was a third one. Was it like septuplets or quintuplets or something like that?
Oh, maybe.
There was one where he was like in a I
feel like the one I said was the most obscure one. It was only on for like a season and a half.
Those were the people really were big fans of. I forget which one. One of those two people were really into, like, as a cult thing. But Andy Richter, revisit Andy Richter, folks. Revisit Joe Koff. Revisit Andy Richter while he's still here. We go back to Rebecca Bayless backstage with Jimmy Jacobs and Lacey. Rebecca says Lacey has requested some interview time. Jimmy preemptively apologizes, but a friendlier Lacey says she's actually quite proud of Jimmy. The way he jabbed that heel into Cabana's throat, he can't even talk anymore. Lacey says she's really proud of Jimmy, and the way they tied Colt up in the ring together was really nice. It was kind of hot. Lacey then says she was just thinking and proceeds to whisper something Jimmy's ear that he is shocked and happy to hear, whatever it is. Rebecca asks what Lacey just said, and Jimmy basically proceeds to act like Curly from the Three Stooges if a hot coal had just been dropped down his shirt. Like he's just unable to speak.
That is a really great reference and a really great analogy, and that is exactly what he was acting like.
Yeah, and so yeah, this is the official, like, this is a turning point in that storyline. This is
finally.
It is funny that after all of this and all the things Jimmy has done in the name of Lacey, like the brutal things he's done to Whitmer stuff, like hitting Colt with a heel shoe, is like, that was really hot. I like you now. But
yeah, it would have made sense for it to happen like after the Whitmer cage match, but you know what? I'm just happy for some progression and not the same promo being done over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And let me ask something, Trevor. Like, be honest. Despite how creepy the whole thing has been, didn't you kind of feel happy for Jimmy here?
No, of course. I think I was even more happy for him at the time. I think I didn't realize quite how creepy it was until retroactively. But no, I mean, I think at this point it's weird. Like, it's weird the different directions the story was being pulled. Because I feel like at first, whether it was intentional or not, Jimmy was kind of a creepy loser. And then at some point you were supposed to be like pissed off at him for being like this beaten down suck up who wouldn't stand up for himself. And then I think at some point you were supposed to like want to see him, like, especially when Cole gave him that speech that one time where he tried to talk Jimmy into breaking away, and then Jimmy was conflicted, but then he attacked Colt. I think you were supposed to feel like you want Jimmy to eventually like stand up for himself and reject this abusive woman. But now I feel like they're kind of shifting into like this different realm where they're like, they kind of want you to like root to have this relationship with this girl where it's a really bad relationship with like abusive people.
Yeah, I mean, but they're both very dastardly and violent, and I guess in some ways, so are the people that they're going after are violent to them. And like, yeah, we've gotten back to the point in this feud where no one is likable, so you just might as well root for the dork to get the girl, because that's the trope that American pop culture has foisted on us for the past however many decades, so you might as well just go with that.
Whatever makes Lacey stop being mean to people, if it makes her happy and it makes Jimmy happy, we'll get behind it. We'll just forget with the logic of this. But
exactly.
We then get a highlight video titled Fifth Year Festival International Influence, which has a clips of a lot of the foreign talent ROH has seen in the last year, which is a nice way to set up our main event, which is the Ring of Honor World Title match. Takeshi Morishima defeats Homicide for the title via pinfall in 16 minutes, 55 seconds after hitting a backdrop driver. Morishima becomes your new Ring of Honor World Heavyweight Champion. Before I get to the match, I have to read something that I really don't want to read, but I think bears mentioning. We shouldn't let them off the hook. Dave Meltzer wrote this in The Observer. Homicide worked for Pro Wrestling Unplugged in Philadelphia the afternoon of his title loss to Morishima, cutting a mixed babyface and heel promo as he heeled on the crowd at points, but was a face at other points, closing saying he was off to beat some slur for Asian people, unquote. People popped decently for that line, which probably doesn't reflect well on the audience.
Probably
During
not.
the match, that's Dave writing that by, which, by the way, I agree.
Yeah.
Dave continues, during the match, Julius Smokes showed his ignorance, yelling pork fried rice at Morishima, which is a Chinese dish and is as intelligent as a wrestler in France seeing Steve Austin and yelling tamales at him. He also called Morishima Japanese monkey, which is at least quote unquote expected racism, and Chinese Jesus.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, listen, so there's a side point. Yes, like it is ridiculous racism, and we could hear it from, you could hear Julius Smokes yelling at Morishima that he was Chinese and all this stuff in the match. But I just have to point out Dave's analogy and like not getting like the gravity of racism, like the idea that like the equivalent of conflating two Asian nationalities is the same as somebody yelling tamales at Steve Austin because Mexico and the United States are nearby countries, and like not realizing the difference with like a French person yelling that at just like a white American versus, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't expect Dave to get that nuance, but point is, it's what Smokes did is much worse than a French person yelling that to Steve Austin, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and the fact that like within the same period, like Smokes is doing a slur for like Vietnamese people, which I will not dignify by saying. He's calling them Chinese, and then he's also, I think at one point he does say something about him being Japanese. So it's like he's basically he's just grabbing the Whitman sampler of negative Asian slurs and stereotypes and throwing them all, which again is somehow even more insulting than if you were just appropriate.
Do you think that like there's any mention among like the staff of ROH, Gabe or Carrie or whoever, that would like even like for 1 second say, hey, don't do racism with in your promos and in your ringside banter. Try to avoid the racism. Do you think they even like bothered mentioning that, or that was just kind of a free for all with that stuff?
You know what? I bet not. There was that story. Remember, I forget when, but there was that Ring of Honor show where it was right after Eddie Guerrero died, and didn't like they say like Smokes, maybe there was a little bit of heat, or not heat, but just like there was at least negative attention because he made some reference to Eddie Guerrero at ringside or something, like smoke him like it or something like that. So, but for some reason, here's the sad thing. This is just my gut feeling based on the world of wrestling in 2007. I bet you that would have be seen as worse than what he did here. Because that's going after a wrestler that just died, and it's a wrestler we all know and love, as opposed to just generic racism, which I feel is really disgusting too.
Yeah, but the thing is, Ring of Honor did pride itself on being like an American promotion that respected Japanese wrestlers and Japanese wrestling and Japanese culture. And so you'd think that they wouldn't want to, have one of their wrestlers yelling that stuff to one of the top stars from Pro Wrestling Noah, a company that they have an important working relationship with. But I don't know. Maybe the people from Noah were like, we like how American wrestling is racist. Like, I don't know. I don't want to speak I don't want to speak for anybody, but like, you would think that they would discourage that sort of talk from their wrestlers toward a Pro Wrestling Noah wrestler. I don't know. What do I know? Well,
we know the story that Samoa Joe tells, that Kento Kobashi before his match with Joe thought he was going to have to be like the sneaky foreign heel. And I know and I think you've made a good case for kind of doubting that he could possibly have felt that way based on other things he's done. But maybe if there is validity to that, maybe Morishima was like, hey, this is what Kento Kobashi was telling me about. This is what wrestling is here, isn't it? This is, you just have to take it, which would be horrible. But no, I imagine. So this match felt weird to me, and I can't put my finger on it because there are so many plausible reasons that just, including what we just talked about, that just the one really strong one doesn't stick out among the rest to me. Like, first off, you have the fact that Morishima is a guy that likely a fair number of people in the crowd had never seen wrestle before. And not only is he wrestling in the main event for the world title, he's winning it. Like, obviously people here, I'm sure in that crowd, like, had heard about Morishima, probably heard the buzz from the match he had the night before. Probably some of them had been there the night before. But in some ways, the atmosphere for this match, I don't know about you, Matt, but it didn't feel as weighty as it should. Like, I felt like ideally the question everyone in that crowd should have been asking is, how is Homicide going to deal with a guy like Morishima? And for many watching this, I bet you the question was, well, what kind of guy is this Morishima? Because I haven't seen him. And there's a spot for me that kind of sums it up in the middle of the match where Homicide hits multiple lariats, one to the back, another to the front, and he gets a near fall, which is how he beat Danielson for the title. And the announcers on commentary, they're just screaming praise Zack and Leonard, really trying to hard sell. This is a huge moment, a huge kick out. Morishima just kicked out of what Homicide used to win the world title, the same sequence. And the crowd is pretty quiet.
Yeah, it was actually what he did to beat Joe, actually, at Battle of the Icons.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. I completely made it. But yeah, either way, I feel like Morishima just hasn't been established enough yet. And so when the announcers are freaking out about something and the crowd's not reacting to it, it sometimes creates this weird feeling that makes it feel even flatter than it is. And I thought that moment was one of them where it almost emphasized that the crowd wasn't really buying it at that point. And there's also a little weirdness in that you really don't know what kind of what Morishima is supposed to be yet, like babyface or heel wise. He attacks Homicide in the aisle before Homicide makes his full entrance, and the opening of this match is a ringside brawl before the match can even start. But then on the other end, you have like Julius Smokes openly interfering multiple times in front of the ref, and the ref doing nothing. Like Homicide whips Morishima into a Smokes clothesline on the floor. Smokes later he like gets in the ring and the ref does nothing, and he and Homicide go to double clothesline Morishima. Morishima runs through them, hits them with a clotheslines of his own. Then later on, Smokes grabs Morishima's goddamn leg in front of the ref as Morishima is climbing the turnbuckle and he does nothing about it. So all of that to me kind of illustrates one way Homicide wasn't a natural fit for a world champion, because in some ways cheating even as a babyface kind of does fit Homicide's like persona, which even when he's a good guy, he's kind of an anti-hero, but also muddies the water in big matches like this. Like, are we supposed to feel like he's the underdog here? Because if it is, him cheating kind of cuts against that, kind of hurts that case. And you're coming off a match the night before where Homicide kind of broke the rules more than Jimmy Rave did against Jimmy Rave. So again, it was just a weird tonal thing, but I was entertained by this match. Like at first when Homicide really ends up fighting back and take it to Morishima on the outside before the match officially starts, I felt a little apprehension that like Homicide was going to dominate Morishima too much at the start of what's supposed to be like a monster push for Morishima. But I felt like once they got in the ring and the match officially started, I feel like they found a really good balance of Morishima got more than half the match, but I felt like they gave Homicide enough big spots at the right moments where it didn't feel like a squash. Like, I guess you could say if you wanted to be super ballsy to try and get Morishima over, you could have had Morishima just squash Homicide. But as it is, I felt like Morishima came off as very strong, dominant, but Homicide didn't come away like a job or anything like that. Like, he came off as a top wrestler in the promotion that was still somewhat outmatched by this new guy. And Morishima isn't quite as over here as he was in the Joe match. And this match obviously doesn't have that match's atmosphere, but he still does a lot of his cool signature spots and he wows the crowd with them, just like the night before, the cartwheel avalanche in the corner, the missile drop kick. But he also adds in a new wrinkle because he takes a goddamn superplex from Homicide, which I thought was really impressive. He catches Homicide when he in midair at one point and with a bear hug, and then he turns that into a really nice big overhead belly to belly suplex, which I think gets like the first Morishima chant of the match. And when the match ends, you can tell the crowd's a little surprised, but they're also immediately pumped that they just saw a world title change. Like it's that kind of whoa, and then a pop like, oh yeah.
Back to Joey Lawrence.
Exactly. I do not do the whoa like you, but
yeah.
I would not like Ric Flair's woo wings, but I would eat some whoa wings or whoa. There should be an energy drink that kind of has the stuff that puts you to sleep. And it's called Whoa Energy, like when you want to tone it down a notch.
I mean, there's going to be a big like Joey Lawrence nostalgia kick at some point in the not too distant future. So I feel like we're just getting on the train early.
You sounded way too knowing there, like you had inside information. There's going to be a Joey. You know what's happening, Trevor. I've told you behind the scenes.
Yeah. We have it all in the works.
Anyway, I would give this match good, borderline very good. I would give it like 3.5 stars, but a really strong 3.5 stars. But it's a really weird 3.5 stars. Like I feel like the vibes are very weird in this match, but
they're the 3.5 pentagrams, right? That's how weird the stars are.
Exactly. These are 3.5 stars in Comic Sans, if Comic Sans is a different font for stars. But Morishima is fun to watch, especially seeing like people discover what he can do that hadn't seen him before. And like I said before, I felt they found a good middle ground for making Morishima look strong, but not completely destroy Homicide. But there was a lot of weird vibes in the racism contributes to the weird vibes is the most generous thing I could say about that. but the heel face, everything I've talked about, it is kind of weird. But what do you think? I'm really interested in what you think, because looking online, this match is one where I've seen people go 4 stars. I've seen people go below 2.5. So this is a match that has a pretty wide range of opinions.
Yeah, when I first watched it in person, I was pretty disappointed by it. It felt kind of anticlimactic and just kind of, like you said, weird. So watching it back now, I was actually pleasantly surprised by how much I liked it. I thought, obviously you have to put aside some of the terrible stuff Smoke said, but I really liked the pace. I liked the energy that Morishima brought. And yeah, the crowd wasn't with it the whole time, but by the end, they were popping big, not just for the finish, but also for the near fall. After Morishima hits his own big lariat that Homicide kicks out of right before the final backdrop driver. I really thought that the crowd had finally gotten there right as they needed them to for the end. Before that, it was just a lot of back and forth. I think everything Morishima did looked good. I thought that the top rope superplex was really impressive. Actually, I guess it was like a superplex where Homicide was standing on the middle rope, but still. I thought everything that they were doing on the outside was good. I thought it was really fun because when Homicide was knocking Morishima through all the guardrails at ringside, he was basically destroying the barricades on every single side of the ring. Anytime he threw Morishima into a barricade, that barricade just moved a million feet. It just got destroyed. And I thought that kind of added to the weight, literally, of Morishima, literally and figuratively. I also liked, because I don't know if you noticed this, but one of Morishima's shticks is that his entrance is very no nonsense. He comes to the ring and then boom, the music's done. He doesn't wait around, doesn't preen, he doesn't pose. So he comes out to the ring in this fur coat and a top hat. And
it's like a black cowboy hat and a black fur coat. He looks like a goth Dusty Rhodes from 1985. And it's I was like, but he's still like you said, he's still that dour. He attacks Homicide, and his entrance was I'm gonna strut a bit.
But he didn't. That's the thing. He dressed like he was gonna strut, but he did not strut. He wore that stuff, but he just marched the ring and took it off immediately. That's what Morishima does. He has this what should be this pageantry about him, but he will not indulge it at all. Yeah. And you're right. It was a cowboy hat, but it was big enough that it sort of looked to me like a top hat too. And and he just threw it off. I like that. And we'll talk about what he does after the match in a second, after you get to it. But I just like the vibe Morishima brings of this just no nonsense. I'm gonna kick ass, and that's what he did. And I thought that Homicide was mostly with him here. And if this was how Homicide was going to go out, I thought 2 straight matches in a row where I would say what Homicide brought with these 2 title defenses, unlike in his first 2, was a pace. Just a fast-paced, brawling, hard-hitting style where they weren't going to slow down for anyone. I thought that the match with Rave was great. I thought this was very good. I thought, Homicide had 4 title defenses. I thought 2 of them were pretty disappointing. I think he was getting his sea legs with the last 2, but also, like you said, he probably wasn't the best fit for the title. And it was cool to see Morishima win it, because even though it made sense that Morishima would win, it was still very surprising on the night to see it actually happen. So I ended up liking this a lot more now than I did then.
So I guess we should talk a little bit about Homicide's reign, as short as it was. You just mentioned the 4 matches. And a thing that's commonly said about Homicide's title reign, and said about wrestlers often in general, is some wrestlers are better as chasers of a title, and some wrestlers are better as champions. And for some wrestlers, the money's all in the chase, and for some wrestlers, the money's in being the champion. And everyone pretty much goes back to Homicide was best as the chase. And I agree with that. I also do think you still have to give the chaser. Some people who feel like, oh, someone's better as a chaser, they almost never want to give them the title. You still have to give the guy the title, because you never know how they can be as a champion until they actually do it, no matter what you suspect.
Also, you have to pay off a chaser, else the audience gets disillusioned.
Yeah, exactly. You have to give people what you want. So even if it's something short like this, but yeah, I felt bad for Homicide because, like you mentioned, the first two matches went really bad for him because you start the ring and go, it's a double shot where you're facing Chris Hero one night and Joe the next. You think that's going to sound great. But the first night was that Hero match where Hero completely kind of steals the match with his shtick, and Homicide's like an afterthought who's just kind of letting Hero do it. And then the next night you have the Samoa Joe match, which was probably one of the more not a terrible match, but one of the more disappointing matches those two have ever had. That gets completely derailed because Homicide can't stop focusing around hecklers, and then there's the grandmas. Like, for those who don't know, I'm not being facetious, actual grandmas who are, all of that. But then, like you said, there's the Jimmy Rave match, which ironically is the match that I feel like people, if people remember that one, they go, oh, that? But like, if you actually rewatch it, that's the glory of his title reign is the Jimmy Rave match. And then, yeah, I agree. It was good here. Yeah, I think I feel kind of bad for Homicide because I feel like there is a world where he could have had a better reign than he had here. But I also feel like this reign also did kind of confirm to me he wasn't meant to be a champion. He didn't feel like a guy who really wore the title. Like, he had too much of a chip on his shoulder even as champion. Like, that part of his character is like a very important part of his character. But it never changed even once he was champion, which goes from kind of endearing when he's like always talking about being screwed or getting pissed off at fans. It feels different when you're the champ and you're the babyface and you're still kind of like that. And the stuff where he's kind of heel in these matches, how it kind of works against him in the matches, it just was a weirdness to me.
No, I agree that it never felt comfortable around his waist. He could have settled into it eventually. Like I said, these last two matches, I feel like he was starting to get his title match style down, and he just never had a chance to really develop it any further. But it also just, the timing wouldn't have worked out anyway because of TNA. So I think it all worked out probably for the best, at least in terms of the ROH title. I don't know what Homicide would say about what he would have preferred, but at least as far as the presentation, I think the fact that he got the win, he got a few matches under his belt, and then they moved on to this sort of interesting Morishima move. That feels right to me. I guess we'll have to see the Morishima title reign play out to see how right it feels today.
I absolutely think that it is good that he got that chase and that he got that win. I think that was a really special moment, that win. And I think it was worth everything else. Like, if the title reign afterwards wasn't that great, and if some parts of the chase with Cornette weren't that great, that final battle, that one night, I think it paid for everything. It was
for
great.
For sure.
Morishima, I will say, you were saying about the last show about, again, I referenced this before, how it felt like they were trying to do 800 steps with the Generation X split up angle in one night. It felt they were kind of doing the same with Morishima on this weekend, where in one weekend it's an introduction to Ring of Honor fans who had never seen him wrestle before, a dream match with Samoa Joe that, due to the nature of Joe's TNA deal, he actually has to lose in his debut, and then he has to win the title in a shock win the very next night. Like, that's a lot.
But
to get to do,
I think in this case, because it wasn't a convoluted storyline, I don't really mind it. Like, to have like someone new burst onto the scene and suddenly they shake up the whole world. Like, yeah. I think that could work, and it worked for me on the night. I think it probably worked for ROH fans to varying degrees. I remember Morishima's title reign more fondly than most people do. I'm interested to see how it plays out.
So we'll go to the Observer. Dave wrote, Takeshi Morishima, the 6'3.5" very specific, Dave, 315 pounder, who's expected to be the future of Pro Wrestling Noah, captured the ROH championship from Homicide before a stunned crowd of about 900 fans on February 17th in Philadelphia. The decision to go with Morishima, who will be in one of the main events on the March 4th show at Budokan Hall for Noah, defending against Kenta, was actually made by Gabe Sapolsky and officials from Noah back around September. The original idea for 2007 was for Homicide to hold the title until the end of March and have Bryan Danielson win it. But in August, when Danielson suffered his shoulder injury, the feeling was he would work through the end of the year, if possible, but likely have to rest for several months. Homicide was never considered to be a long-term champion, and his contract with TNA was not really one of the key reasons. Homicide is established in New York as the big local star, but in every other city, when he came out with the championship belt, the remarks were he just didn't come across as a champion. The feeling is they needed to go in a different direction because having someone do the 30-minute great technical title matches that Danielson did would get old, and plus nobody could live up to Danielson's standards. The idea is for Morishima to be a Stan Hansen-style, aggressive, fast-paced, brawling world champion. He's as big, if not bigger, faster, and more athletic than Hansen, but he also doesn't have the main event ring experience Hansen had during his 80s heyday. There was definitely some feathers ruffled, including Homicide's, since Morishima was told to run over Homicide similar to how Hansen and Bruiser Brody would run over everyone in the 80s. There were even spots set up for Morishima to no-sell Homicide's offense. The idea was to get him over as the type of character the promotion has never had before. Morishima has the ability to sell for smaller guys and stay looking strong, similar to Samoa Joe, but that's not what they want out of him early in the run. Morishima suffered a bloody nose midway through the match. Homicide got in his offense, including a superplex. Morishima, at his size, used a missile dropkick. In the end, Morishima used 3 back suplexes and got the win. It was a unique reaction because nobody was expecting a title change. At first, the place went quiet. Then people started cheering in appreciation for the title change.
You were wait, hold on. It clearly did not ever go quiet after that, right? Like, they popped huge instantly. But anyway.
Yeah. There's like a stunned reaction, but it's an audible reaction immediately. Right. The idea is to make him, at first, a strong heel champion. Noah's part in this equation is for Morishima, 28, to first become a singles champion outside of Japan. The Noah-ROH relations are in that Noah is going old school, with the idea that it's better for the promotion for its future stars to establish themselves as stars and champions outside Japan, and then give them credibility as international stars in the promotion. The best example of this was when New Japan sent Kaiji Muto to the U.S. for several years. He became a big name in the U.S., so when he went back to Japan, the former prelim guy was accepted as a top guy. Last year's Noah project was Kenta, and this year they want both Morishima and Naomichi Marufuji to be the key guys pushed in ROH. It's something of a risky move. ROH has always been about smaller guys, long title matches, and the title representing technical wrestling. Even though business is, as far as a consistent basis, the strongest it has ever been, Sapolsky felt things were getting stale, and these shows were meant to change things up. A lot there. I didn't remember that the original plan was for Homicide to win at Final Battle and then for Bryan to win it back.
That's the only time anyone's ever reported that. So I am not sure that that's true or not. Maybe it is, but I wouldn't read too much into that one report.
I mean, it's not Gabe's style. Like, Gabe never did a repeat champ. So it would definitely, it would be, unless he had some real big plan for it. Yeah, that's weird, especially knowing that the Morishima thing was coming, right? Because would Danielson just immediately go to Morishima then and drop immediately?
Well, no, I think the idea was that Morishima was that was dropped because that was dropped in favor of Morishima. Like, that wasn't in addition to Morishima. That would have been if the Morishima thing hadn't happened.
Yeah, and Homicide being frustrated with this, and other people, Morishima being told he should be working, very aggressive. Here's the thing: if you read this report from David, I said David. That's very formal. From Dave, it makes it sound like, if you didn't see the match, like Morishima just squashed Homicide. He didn't. Like, again, I felt like they found a really good middle ground. So, if they told him to run over Homicide like Bruiser Brody, he didn't do that. He was pretty strong against him, but he didn't just crush him.
No, it was a back and forth match.
But overall, it'll be interesting, and I do agree with Gabe's sentiment that they needed to change things up.
For sure. I think it was a smart move, personally.
Next, we'll go to PW Insider quickly. I think this is PW Insider. It was hard to get the sourcing on this, but they wrote at the time, the decision to have Pro Wrestling Noah's Takeshi Morishima capture the ROH Championship, just his second appearance with the Ring of Honor, has caused quite a bit of discussion among wrestling fans that follow the company. When asked for comment about the title change, ROH's Gabe Sapolsky responded, quote, Morishima winning the title gives the company a completely new vibe. ROH has never had a monster super heavyweight in our entire history, so we are in uncharted territory. I feel it really brings some intrigue to the product. Will BJ Whitmer make it a short title reign and win the title so we can have our defenses on our big shows in Liverpool and Detroit? Will Morishima bring the title to Tokyo? How often will Morishima be in Ring of Honor? Who can size up to Morishima? All these questions are making the company more interesting, unquote. When asked about potential backlash from the decision to move the belt so quickly to Morishima, Sapolsky stated that he wasn't aware of any criticism of the move. And then finally, Matt, this is what I teased. Brian Alvarez from Figure 4 Weekly. This is This is Brian Alvarez. Brian would write, Takeshi Morishima is the new ROH champion, beating Homicide with a hard lariat on Saturday night in Philadelphia. The belief was that Homicide was best served as the guy chasing the belt and not the long-term champion. There are also the issues with TNA pulling Joe and the fact that most likely ROH won't be using TNA contracted talent by the end of the year. My concern, and believe me, I'm very concerned, is that Morishima is based in Japan, and so you'd think he's not going to be a long-term champion, or maybe even hold the belt for more than a week or so, and his next title defense this Friday is in Dayton against BJ Whitmer in all caps. I do not understand the Whitmer love, unless what you love in wrestling is guys taking bumps off high places and through multiple tables or barbed wire or whatever else and deciding not to do any selling whatsoever. If Morishima wins, he defends against Kenta on March 4th at Budokan Hall. I can see ROH wanting to make that match just to put over the fact that their title is a world title, so perhaps Whitmer isn't in line for the belt just yet. Of course, the other part of the storyline is that if Whitmer doesn't win the belt, there will be no ROH title matches during the UK tour, which sounds like something Booker Gabe Sapolsky wouldn't want to have happen. I guess we'll see. First off, why does he hate Whitmer so much and think he's just a deathmatch guy? Second of all, he really was scared that BJ Whitmer was going to win the Ring of Honor World title. Like, so many things he says there could not be more wrong. Morishima does work basically a pretty much near full-time schedule for Ring of Honor and through the year.
It's just like it's the danger of having too strong of opinions about a product you clearly don't watch on a regular basis.
Yeah, you can see the difference between like a Mike Johnson or a Dave even and Brian of a guy who's like checking in a little bit versus people that actually know the promotion. And yeah, you played yourself, Brian. I'm not against him, but on this night you played yourself. But after the match, we get a loud Morishima chant as Lenny Leonard on commentary talks about a shocker in Philly. Morishima aggressively stands up, grabs the title from the ref. He holds it up to a pop. A couple of students and BJ Whitmer come in the ring to congratulate him, and he attacks them all as Dave Prazak wonders, what is Morishima doing? Morishima then walks to the back as Lenny Leonard screams, quote, where's he going with the belt? And I thought,
the dressing room, like you're supposed to go?
Where literally everybody else goes with the title. This is not CM Punk taking the title after the Devil speech. Anyway, and it ends with another fifth-year festival to be continued screen. So, was that their attempt to set up a cliffhanger?
Their cliffhanger. Their champion wins and then walks back up the aisle to the backstage area. That's the cliffhanger.
So yeah, I thought that was a really weird note to end the show on, but it did make me chuckle. Matt, who won the Matt F. Trophy today?
Oh, man, it's Kevin Steen. Come on, of course, it's Kevin Steen. I was so happy for him. He seemed so happy and excited and just proud of himself, and the crowd loved him and the adulation, and you knew big things were ahead. So, Kevin Steen, welcome to the Matt F. Trophy Winners Circle. There's a lot of people have to vote on that circle to get in it. No, just kidding. It's just me. But yes, he is the winner of the Matt F. Trophy for 50 Year Festival Philly.
And as for the show proper, I will say I thought it was an enjoyable show, but I'm not going to Brian Alvarez road report it and say that word is that was one of the best shows Ring of Honor ever did. I think the New York show the night before was significantly better. I think you had one really good, really notable match in the mid card. I enjoyed the main event. You know, there's as always with Ring of Honor, there's stuff on the undercard. Generally, even like everything was at least like a little bit above average to me. But there was just the Delirious Roderick Strong match felt not good to see, and stuff like, you know, the tag title match and the Whitmer Jacobs team brawls, it just felt like lesser versions of the kind of matches we'd see on other better Ring of Honor shows. But they did do a good job of giving you something really significant with the title change, and they gave you something probably without intending really significant with that Steen and Generico match. So overall, I think it's a very noteworthy show. There are parts of it I really enjoyed, but I would not call this a great show.
Yeah, it's extremely uneven, and the vibes were weird at different points, especially just that, like you said, the whole Delirious thing felt really bad. But there were just enough special and moments that left me feeling positively to completely pan the show either. It's just one of the more uneven shows we've seen recently, but not dull at all like some of the shows we saw in late 2006. So I would say, yeah, overall, I would say it's a middle, like if you do the thumb scale, thumbs in the middle show, but the things that are good are good enough that I really, really, really like them. And I think in some ways that Steen and Generico versus the Briscoes match is a match you should see. One, because it's really good, and two, because it does have some real historical significance to it.
Yeah.
And the main event has some historical significance to it too. Not a must-see match necessarily, but a good one and an important moment.
And that brings us to plugs. So as always, if you want to contact us through the years at gmail.com, THROH for through, at Trevor Dame on Twitter, at Mayor MGF on Twitter. And we're on YouTube if that's a way you prefer to watch the show. A couple people do. I see the numbers. There are people consuming hours of the show every month on YouTube. Not many, but the ones that do are soaking it up, and whatever butters your toast, guys. We put there for you. Next time on the show, we will not be covering Fifth Year Festival Dayton, which is our next scheduled regular show, because if you follow us on Twitter, you would have noticed, but you hadn't. Matt came up with an idea quite a while ago that we've been thinking about for a long time that we are going to do with our next episode, because our next episode is going to be a Bryan Danielson career retrospective special. It is our first ever show that isn't just a regular covering Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning, going in order. Don't worry. The show after that, we will be right back to the Fifth Year Festival, Dayton, and we will continue in order. But we've got some irons in the fire. We are going to recap Bryan's career, we might list some things, we might learn some things you don't know, just a hint. Some old guests maybe return. We got some irons in the fire. We'll see how many of them return, but we have the open call out for pretty much everybody giving some thoughts. And we're going to talk about a wrestler who's kind of good. Like something about Through the Years, we always let you know what to think. And I know people have been wondering for years, is Bryan Danielson good or not? We will make the final evaluation on that next episode.
The final countdown to find out if Bryan Danielson was good at wrestling.
Exactly. We will decide with guests, with fun, with games and prizes, not the last two things, but it will be fun. So until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.